She's like, hey, no. I was just saying, Lena's great. She's like, you guys don't have someone there every morning to do that for you? And I was like, no.
Maggie gets that question all the time.
Yeah.
She like, who does your makeup, Maggie?
She didn't know. I said, no, we just slap some on before we go.
Since I grew a beard, I didn't hardly ever do it anymore.
Since I grew a beard.
All right.
Hey, she's here. She's here. She's here.
Who's she?
Probably Cindy.
Kim Fields showed up.
Oh, Kim's here.
How about that?
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Perfect. All right, Mark, we're standing by.
Okay.
All right.
We're live on YouTube already.
Okay.
Hi, YouTubes.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kim Fields, everybody.
Kim made it! Kim's gonna be in the debate.
Hey!
Production people, just be aware we're doing the Facebook page here, so try not to block the front of it.
Oh, okay.
Kim, you'll be on it. Yeah.
That looks like you're writing.
Yeah. You're going to be right
You're
here.
right here.
Okay. Does anybody have any mints?
Oh, please, I hope you find them.
5, 4, 2.
Welcome to the Brandt Center here at Northwest Nazarene University. This is the Debate Super Show here on KTVB. We have got a big lineup for you tonight, a double header. We have so many things to get through, but before we get through a lot of it, let's set the stage here. Of course, we've got a whole panel of our KTVB journalists here, live from NNU. Our photographer, Paul Belke, he's going to literally set the stage. We'll be able to show what's going on here. This is where the debates will go down here tonight for the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, and then later on, part 2 of our doubleheader, the governor's debate between Paulette Jordan and Brad Little. A big night tonight. We've got a lot to get through, and we'll start, though, with introducing our panel. First, we'll start here on my left. KTVB's Mark Johnson. Mark?
I heard you kick off the show by calling it a super debate show and a doubleheader. So you're fortunate to be tuned in to a super debate doubleheader show on social media.
It is.
And we're glad you're along. I'm Mark Johnson. This will be my 3rd and 4th debates that I've been honored to be a panelist on in the last 3 days. And of course, that in advance of next Tuesday's election. And we are doing this to make sure that you are informed on all of the issues that you have asked us to ask the candidates on, and that's our intent and has been our intent, and I think we've been doing that pretty well the last couple of debates.
You might hear some crackling and seeing people walking around because we're still setting up here at NNU. And I should probably explain why I called it a super show.
Yeah.
There's a thunderstorm just inside the auditorium.
There is.
It's a super show, Mark, because
the umbrella.
It's 3:30 right now, and this Facebook live stream is going to be running through the first debate. We're going to have a halftime show. We're going to have the governor's debate, and then we'll have a post-game show. So this, a 5-hour show, super show.
Who is the entertainment in your halftime show?
You are.
You are.
I'm the entertainment?
Yeah, I heard you could play piano.
Well, I was actually just playing
He's a very
piano.
talented pianist. All right, so we move down the panel over to our Doug Petcash. Doug,
put my Merce under the table.
Merce? That's a good-looking Merce there,
Doug, did you bring your guitar? Apparently there's going to be halftime entertainment.
There is a nice stage here. The drums that were here the other day have disappeared.
They're gone.
They are. Doug, KTVB morning anchor, as well as the host of Viewpoint. Doug, a big night here tonight, a doubleheader. What are you most excited for?
Boy, both of these debates are really, really important, obviously. What's also interesting, I think, to note is that you're seeing what is turning out to be the case across the country this year, where there are more women running for prominent positions in state and federal offices. And you've got, definitely we'll have a female superintendent of public instruction. You have Paulette Jordan, the first potential female governor, first potential Native American governor. So we've got some historic things that are developing throughout this. And I think it's interesting to see that. There are some women running for lieutenant governor also. So for the first time ever, the state of Idaho is going to have a woman lieutenant governor, a historic thing there. Of course, that's not one of the debates tonight, but it is one of those trends that we're seeing. But these races are just so crucially important. We always hear that education is the key issue in Idaho. Both of the gubernatorial candidates have that ranked as #1 priority on their list.
And the state budget reflects that.
Yes.
Oh yeah. I mean, what, 2/3 of the budget for the state goes to education?
But yeah.
It is right around half the budget.
That's a lot of money.
devoted to
$1.8
education.
billion.
Right.
This year is what I was going to say the debate, what the budget is for this year. So yeah, I mean, huge. And so these two debates will go really hand in hand with that.
Mark, historically, when you talk about the superintendent's race, how would you evaluate what we're going to see here tonight between Sherri Ybarra, who is the superintendent right now, and Cindy Wilson, who is the challenger? We've seen a lot of commercials. We've seen a lot of excitement towards this debate, and we've seen a lot of excitement overall in this race. Is this pretty typical with this position?
Well, Sherri Ybarra, of course, coming off of her first term, and Cindy Wilson has never served in a state capacity in this forum. She was on the governor's task force committee. She's been in charge of some other fairly large organizations, but this is her first time running for state superintendent. So in that regard, we do have a little bit of new ground, and their ideas differ greatly on the best way to move the needle. She claims that that needle hasn't moved in 4 years, despite the career ladder, despite this being in the last year of the career ladder, despite the $133 million that went into the certification program. She's claiming that graduation rates are stagnant. So the two of them have a lot of issues to debate over, and it's going to make for a lively 1 hour debate.
And of course, the entire broadcast here tonight, including the debates, is fully interactive. We'll be monitoring Facebook Live during the debates and during our show panel. So if you have questions or comments, send them our way, and your questions just might make it to the candidates. I know we've been getting a lot of questions in our newsroom, emails, phone calls, social media posts saying, ask the candidates this, ask the candidates that. And kind of actually just to explain this, Mark, how do we formulate the questions? People always ask me, well, how do you decide what you're going to ask the candidates? You have a short time. What's the process you work through in some of these debate pre-meetings?
We get together with our news editors, managers, and also with our internet folks that have heard from you and the emails that you have sent in, compiled all of those together. We've researched what you believe are the biggest topics and the biggest concerns that you have. We put all those together and we say, who wants to tackle the number one issue? Okay, why don't I start? Okay, Doug, what do you want to take? Well, I've been wrestling with this, and this is what I've heard. And so our debate meetings take longer than the actual debate itself.
Yeah, and you know, we also reach out to organizations too. We get a lot of, I've gotten questions from people on Twitter wanting to hear about public lands and the new trespassing law and the Wilkes brothers putting up gates in, you know, the backcountry of Idaho. But we also reach out to you know, the Idaho Education Association, the teachers union, to find out what's top of mind for them in terms of issues that affect teachers. I hope I don't get this correct. The Idaho Association of the Education of Young Children, who are big advocates for, you know, early childhood education, and they, you know, provide some ideas on direction to go, but we're open. We take a lot of questions on, you know, email and Facebook.
Sometimes the debate that we have in the debate planning meeting is as good as the debate itself.
Especially when Mark Johnson's involved.
Yes.
When Kim Fields is involved, that's when.
Kim's here as well. Dee Sarton's here. Hi, Dee. How you doing? Dee, our moderator, she's getting ready as well. We should have told you. We're doing a big pre-show panel right now. Dee, come on by. Come here, Dee.
I wasn't invited.
Well,
But
you're always invited.
Here I am.
Looks like Mark's giving you the seat.
Yeah, here you
I
go.
don't want a seat. I mean, okay.
All right, just for a minute. Mark's got to go do his hair. He's got to get ready, of course.
No, I've got to do the coin toss.
He's got to do the coin toss, and that
that's right.
we'll be having that live here in a minute as well. We have the coin toss. It looks like Troy's actually brought Mark another chair, so how exciting is this? All right, getting back to what we're talking about here tonight, Dee, you're jumping in the conversation here. We're talking about the process we go through before the debates. Now let's talk about the debates. If you're just joining us here tonight, we have a doubleheader. What's the first part of our doubleheader look like?
Oh, boy, I think it'll be so interesting because I personally have not had a chance to see these two go at it with each other on the issues in depth, and so I think this will be a real interesting thing. Here we have, you know, two longtime educators. They've both been teachers. They've both been principals. They have, you know, perspective that all of us really want to take advantage of as we try to grapple with issues in education that are so important, whether it's, you know, how you feel about protecting our kids in school, or or how you feel about funding, and how do we keep teachers in the profession, and how do we help our rural school districts. I mean, it just goes on and on. So I'm hoping we'll hear some new ideas tonight that they will challenge each other on, and that makes it a really wonderful opportunity for everybody.
You know, Doug, on your Viewpoint program, you also you have time to really get in depth on your 30-minute program. Sometimes on the news, we're not able to go in depth on everything. Working through education over the last year, working up to this general election, what are the big topics on the education forefront that you think the candidates and the people are watching out for?
2, funding, school safety.
Yeah.
And funding is huge. Of course, that's not just, we hear a lot about the career ladder teacher pay raise system that's been in place now for 4 years, 1 more year to go, but that's definitely not the only element of that funding picture. We've got just proposals for, I think, another $100 million worth of school funding for next year, and that's pretty much been the case the last few years. The legislature and the governor have been, and the superintendent have been pushing for that extra money, and it's been going through. What I think is kind of interesting this time around too is that there's a new commercial out by Lieutenant Governor Brad Little who said, "I'm ready to give you another tax cut," and so I'm wondering how he might jibe that with how am I going to give more funding for education, because he's saying also that's his top priority, especially for him, literacy K through 3. And so funding and school safety.
And what does the school safety conversation revolve around?
2 competing ideas is what it seems like. You're going to hear a lot about Mrs. Ybarra's KISS program, the Keep Idaho Students Safe program, in which she went out and got feedback from teachers, students, and parents to determine ways that could make our schools safer, including a crisis prevention counselor that would be a statewide counselor who would help schools coordinate things like, let's see here, training, threat assessment efforts, also talking about a school safety tip line and security grants for schools based on their particular needs. Mrs. Wilson argues that Mrs. Ybarra didn't reach out to the Office of School Safety here in the state that the governor had established for that particular reason. So we're going to hear, I'm pretty sure, that back and forth on whose plan or which was the right way to go. And it's still, God, you see what's happening in Pittsburgh with the synagogue shooting. A student died today in a shooting at a school not far from Charlottesville, North Carolina. Obviously, the synagogue is not a school, but it's a public building that, and so
Vulnerable.
it keeps that conversation top of mind. And we haven't seen any reason lately that public safety and gun violence aren't going to continue to be topics of conversation, and so that'll be it tonight too.
And it's definitely a focal point, not only at the state level, but federally. It's recognized that some states need help. Idaho just got more than $500,000 in a federal grant to promote this anonymous tip line, in case there's an issue. And it's, is that tip line necessarily going to be there if there was an attack, on the school grounds and make a difference? As people have talked about with security guards, that's up for debate.
I think the tip line would be more about prevention, because it would be like, hey, so-and-so's saying some pretty scary things.
And there's been debates about how you want to take that money and use it, and more people are calling for armed security guards. Some people are saying we don't need more guns in our schools, and these are real issues that we talk about here tonight, and these are really sensitive topics that these candidates may have to tackle here tonight.
Because Cindy Wilson even says she's comfortable carrying a gun, but not carrying a gun in the classroom.
Correct.
And she doesn't believe that teachers should have that burden on top of their classroom duties. But
we already have schools doing that in Idaho.
A couple of them anyway.
We have Utah, for example, where concealed carry is perfectly legal and has been done for 15 years there. So a lot of Idahoans looking to that state and how they've handled it. So yeah, there's just so many questions to be asked and so much to learn from their perspectives.
Dee, I was just going to mention, and Joe, if I could interrupt, if you're watching, obviously on our Facebook Live right now, you're seeing kind of a poll right now of who you would vote for. If you're interested in voting and weighing in, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. You can go to ktvb.com/vote, or you can, if you're on your mobile device, you can check out the KTVB app, and that is your chance to weigh in and vote in our unscientific informal poll here as to which candidate
good anecdotal evidence.
It is very interesting.
Yeah, and those are live results, by the way, we should mention.
And are we going to keep this up, the voting up during the debate?
Mark, are we keeping
I believe it will be up here on Facebook Live.
The entire debate?
That will really be interesting.
On Facebook Live.
Live.
Yes.
Okay,
Facebook
fine.
Live.
Facebook Live.
And the vote will still be going on.
Vote will be going. Yeah, and I think we will be talking about the final results right after the debate at 5 o'clock. We'll be going over the results, and I also know we'll be able to tell how many people voted in the poll, and we'll also be able to have the results here. And if you're just seeing this right now, the question we have on our megaphone poll for the superintendent race, who will you vote for? Cindy Wilson, the Democrat, Sherri Ybarra, the Republican, or other? No one has answered other just yet. And also, we'll have these polls going on the bottom of our screen throughout the night for superintendent race as well as the governor's race coming up. Mark, do we have a ETA on the coin flip or the? Any moment now. All
I'm
right.
going to go get my stuff organized, but
we will see you soon.
Looking forward to this.
All right. I think, is Morgan going to come sneak in?
Joe,
Come on over.
I want the Wi-Fi password.
You want the Wi-Fi password? It is written down on this page in capital letters in blue.
Thank
I
you,
think that's the
Mr.
password.
Keeper of all Wi-Fi.
No problem.
It's
well,
an
thank
easy
you so
one.
much for joining us here tonight. Morgan, you're joining us now.
I am. Am I mic'd up or am I?
You
good?
are. It's
I
right
am?
here.
Oh, it's
Look
right
at
there.
that.
Look at that.
We got an awesome
Yeah.
mic set. Morgan, you'll be on the panel for the governor's debate.
I will.
We've been talking about the superintendent's race. We're going to move on a little bit now to the governor's race.
Okay.
What are you looking for tonight? We have a 90-minute debate. There's a
Yeah.
lot of topics to touch on. It should be an exciting debate.
I'm actually really looking forward to the fact that it is 90 minutes because I sat on the panel for the gubernatorial debate with Idaho Public Television. It was only an hour. We got a lot accomplished in that hour, but there's still so many lingering questions and there's still so much to discuss. You know, we didn't get into corrections. We didn't get into infrastructure, growth necessarily. You know, we talked a lot about education and we talked about some issues and shakeups with Paulette Jordan's campaign, and then as far as Brad Little went, transparency and those sorts of things. But there was so much left to touch on. There are so many issues. I was just talking to our general manager about just how many issues there are that I want these candidates to address.
You ready? Okay, Morgan, we're going to take a step aside real quickly. Mark Johnson is explaining right now the rules of the coin flip. Essentially, the winner of the coin flip will get to choose if they want to go first, and then they will give the first. They'll have the first opening statement, and they'll have the first closing statement, or they can go second, where they'll have the second opening statement and the second closing statement. And Doug, really, when you talk about strategy, getting that last word in is what you're looking for a lot of times. So if you win the coin toss,
You can go second on
you can go
both.
second on both.
Yeah.
So Mark's going to call it here. He will flip the special coin, and I don't know what happened there. I think.
We've had a flub
Okay.
coin toss.
We're going to do another one.
debunked.
I think that there was confusing. There's a lot of talking going on, so I think it's confusing to figure out exactly who's talking about what at the same time. So here we go. Heads or tails in the air, Mark. We'll throw it.
She called tails.
Cindy Wilson calls tails, and it's heads.
It's heads.
So the state superintendent right now, Sherri Ybarra, will get to choose to go first or second. And she has chosen to go second and second. Doug, you've seen a lot of these debates over the years. Is there a significant competitive advantage to getting the last word in, or is that kind of just an old thing we say?
It's always good to have the last word. However, you have to keep in mind also that opening and closing statements are a minute.
Yeah.
So powerful statements, well thought out, clearly stated, I think are more important. But hey, having the last word is really the way to leave people who are watching with that final thought of, you know, they always say, vote for me on November 6th. And, you know, if they make a good closing statement, then that's what's going to linger with people a lot of times. Unless, of course, there's a lot of fiery give and take.
Yeah, which, you know, in that IPTV debate that they hosted, there was a little bit of that back and forth, even to just start it out. I don't know if you guys...
Are you talking about the superintendent's debate? Or?
Yeah, you know, when they first started out in that debate, and the first question that was asked by Clark Corbin was about that campaign event that Ybarra hosted, and she didn't quite answer the question, but Cindy kind of, you know, responded and had that little back and forth. And so, you know, we'll have that throughout the debate. As always, we'll give them all an opportunity to respond. To be able to wrap it up with a nice little bow is always how we have that format set up.
So, thank you for joining us here on Facebook, and I believe we're on YouTube tonight, Doug.
Yes, we are.
I have a super show for you tonight. We're about 15 minutes in to what's going to be about 5.5 hours of coverage for you. And here on the Facebook portion of our coverage, we are fully interactive here tonight. As you're watching, we are standing by here at the top of the hour, 4 o'clock local time. We'll start our first of 2 debates here tonight, the State Superintendent of Public Instruction. But here on Facebook, we're taking your comments, we're taking your questions. We're already seeing some of them rolling in. And one question that just rolled in, really interesting. Zoe Kelly said, I'd love to hear the superintendent candidates address teachers' wages and what, if anything, they plan to do to increase salaries or benefits to attract and keep quality teachers in our state. And that's a big question,
Well,
Doug.
and it is because we're obviously going to ask about the career ladder teacher pay raise system that's been in place for 4 years, has 1 more year to go. So whoever is the next superintendent is going to have to be the one who, among those who would propose how we would go forward from there in the state, and whether that's something that they would support to continue pumping more money into teacher pay raises. And so, yes, we'll hear about that today, I'm sure. And we'll hear Mark sing Volare.
And when you look at other states surrounding Idaho, others, and I covered this story a couple of months ago, you look at incentives in other states that teachers have. So Wyoming and Oregon and all these nearby states that are encouraging teachers to come there from Idaho. Maybe they're getting their education at Boise State, and then they go off and they teach in different states because there's incentive programs.
Such
There's
as like
housing.
loan forgiveness, that kind of thing.
Rural loan forgiveness, which, you know, similar to doctors, you know, you face the same shortage in Idaho, whether it's rural or urban Idaho. And so if the superintendent can have these plans in place, I think that's much more attractive to teachers, and they'll want to stay.
Well, it's
Or
about
come in the first
creativity.
place,
Oh,
too.
that's true.
Yes.
And this came up a lot in the governor's debates on Idaho Public Television. When you talk about, there's debates over if Idaho is last in a lot of categories, and they aren't. A lot of categories, Idaho is not 50th. But the point that Paulette Jordan made is, we might not be 50th, but we're not in the top 10. We're not in the top 15. We're not in the top 20 in a lot of categories. So how do you move the dial on that? How do you move the needle on that? And that really, to me, comes down to new ideas, creative ideas, making changes. And that's what you're looking for in a leader when we talk about either one of the debates here tonight for superintendent or for governor. It's what ideas you're going to bring to the table, what concrete plans do you have? And these are the forums, these debates tonight, where we get to ask those questions and hopefully get good answers.
Absolutely, and there's just so many issues. It's just such a huge thing that this debate could be 2 or 3 hours.
Well,
You know?
Oh, yeah.
And thinking about this debate in particular and how that trickles down to the next debate that starts at 5:30. So,
Yeah.
I mean, whoever wins this race is going to have to work hand in hand with whoever becomes governor and the legislature as well.
course.
Because think about how much all the initiatives she's tried to push, Ybarra as superintendent, and how you need the legislators backing. Because if you don't have the legislature on your side, you can't get the funding for it. And if you don't have the governor on your side, you can't get, you know, his vision, you can't get it implemented with his recommendations or her recommendations, whoever wins. So it's really important that whoever wins this works hand in hand with whoever wins the
And Joe, you were talking about our rankings, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but one of the categories in which Idaho has climbed steadily, I believe, is in either teacher pay or overall funding. It was for 49th, and now it's up to 46th, I believe, in the last couple of years. That is one place we're seeing money being pumped in, making a difference, but a lot of people argue it needs to be more.
Well, right. So Idaho spends a big chunk of their general fund budget on education, one of the top in the country, and that's something we rank highly in, is that percentage of our general fund budget that goes to education. But if you look at the whole pie of our general fund, it's not very large. So really, you have a lot of the state's budget going to education, but compared to other states, that's still not a lot of money.
It's all about population. I mean,
And Ybarra has said, you know, in previous debates and throughout her tenure, that she, over the time that she has been superintendent, she's got $100 million invested into public education. And so,
This is actually a run-through that's going on behind us right now. I saw Morgan give me the panic look like, are we starting? We're about 9 minutes away from starting the
but
debate.
this is pretty cool about Facebook Live, too,
Yeah,
is that
we
we
can see
can
what's going
give
on
people
right
a little
now.
bit. You'll hear Dee talking now in the background, and that's what Dee is practicing what she'll be saying to introduce the show this evening. The director has an opportunity, and the camera people to practice their shots and their calls and make sure everything beginning is smooth. The candidates are also standing at the podium, which we can't show right now, but they are, you know, getting situated and comfortable in their positions where they'll be debating today for an hour.
That's pretty cool. And everybody at home is welcome to join in. Morgan's going to look through some of the comments there on Facebook.
Morgan's mom actually asked a question.
did she?
She did, yeah.
Doreen Boydston was on there.
She.
There's Dodo.
Shout
you want
out.
to ask her a question?
Okay, my mother says, what is, typo, is being done about overcrowding in West Ada, especially with population growth? Very good question, seeing as her daughter did attend a school in the West Ada School District.
That's where you're from.
Yep. Eagle High School grad, but you look at, it's not just West Ada. I mean,
No, it is other
it's
places.
everywhere. But West Ada sees it because they're the largest district in the state of Idaho, and that's where the most growth is happening. They are building a new high school, so to answer that question, West Ada did get the permission to annex and rezone that plot of land where that would go, but that's just one small
And
solution.
it's interesting too, though, because the Treasure Valley is growing so fast. It's like 18,000 plus people per year in the Treasure Valley, but the rural areas are seeing that struggle with having smaller populations that can't afford the supplemental levies, that don't have the per pupil funding because the populations are so small. And so that's a big part of this discussion today in the superintendent's debate too, is what can be done to help those rural school districts out that don't have the means from their local populace to help out.
You get voter fatigue. I mean, you can't keep going back to people in the Melba school district and asking them to pass supplemental levies every single year.
First question, if I may.
You know, there's got to be some, and it's for overhead. You know, a lot of it is for maintenance, a lot of it is for just maintaining what they have and not necessarily growing. But you can't even go to voters in West Ada and Boise school district and ask them every single year to pass the supplemental levy. So there needs to be a larger injection of funding into the general fund budget or from another revenue source in order to give more money to
The Boise School District a few years ago did do that really huge bond issue that, you know, for capital projects, but it's not the same thing as a supplemental levy. So
And you mentioned rural
so funny
schools.
because I struggled in Spanish.
So much about teacher pay
had
and
to have,
incentivizing people to stay is so
13
often those
credits at the
teachers that
University of
maybe are
Missouri
from Middleton or
to
they're
get a
from
bachelor's degree. You had to
Marsing,
take
they go to West Ada
language
or they go to Boise School District
order to
because similar to law enforcement, these districts can offer a lot more money and it's just 45 minutes to an hour away. So what incentives are there for these teachers other than the fact that they love that rural lifestyle and they want to give back to the community out of the goodness of their hearts?
Hey guys, we're 4 minutes away. Sorry.
Okay.
All right.
4 minutes.
So they're going to get in place, and everyone's going to start. Okay. All right. So we're getting the 4-minute warning
We
here. Morgan's
are
going to
leaving.
go prepare for the governor's
if I'm
debate. We will
elbowing
see her in about an hour.
Are you staying here?
I will be here, Morgan.
Hi, Natalie,
You
I
need
can
me?
hear you.
Good luck.
I'll be here.
Let me know if you need me.
Hopefully I don't. All right, Tyson, our timekeeper, can now take his seat. So we're going to start putting together all our chords, and we're going to have our debate coming up here right at 4 o'clock. So we'll stick with you here for another minute or so. Let's take a look now to our megaphone poll, which is rolling live right now on Facebook. If you take a look at it,
Did you get the Wi-Fi
pardon me, I
password?
got to plug into my ISP too, so that we can get ready for the whole show. Cindy Wilson is leading our poll right now with 61%, and we will see if that changes during the
Hearing a
course
lot
of the
of
debate.
shuffling right now.
Sherri Ybarra 37% and 0% others. So our voters they're committed to the two candidates.
Popping in behind you real
What's
quickly.
up, Morgan?
Do you have the Wi-Fi?
I do have the Wi-Fi password. It is written on this sheet of paper right there. If you want to, I can text it to you, or you can just copy it in. Okay, sounds good. And
Sorry,
then Morgan will be
reaching
back in a
over.
minute. This is why it's cool, you know.
I promise I'm leaving.
You know,
I
you
swear.
can stay. We know you're getting ready. It's cool though, because we're on Facebook. You know, it's kind of just informal. We're kind of just hanging out with
Hey
you.
Joe, is it NNU wireless? Is that what we're trying
It's
to do?
NNU
NNU
visitor. Well, we're not giving
I'm not.
out
I'm
the
just
we're not
the
gonna give out
server.
the password, but anyways. So as we wrap up,
We're
our
not going to give
Facebook
out the
Live portion
password,
of
and they'd have to be close.
I'm not giving out the
We
password.
are going to be with you
And they
on
would have to be
Facebook the
close.
entire night. So feel free to join us. We want to look out for your comments and your questions for the candidates. We'll be monitoring the Facebook comments during the debates as well as both of our shows. And if you're just joining
Are you
us,
guys
the
hearing
debate
at this
for
very moment?
State Superintendent is coming up here in less than 3 minutes. So we are going to be switching away to that in just a moment. But immediately following this debate, we're going to have essentially our halftime show where we're going to have our pre-show for the governor's debate, which is coming up at 5:30. Also be able to join us on the KTVB News at 5. So we are going to step aside right now from our pre-show panel. We're glad you're with us here tonight. Our first debate coming up in just minutes. The State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Make sure to send us your comments and questions right here on Facebook. For now, though, we're going to get ready, and we'll have that debate coming up, it looks like, in 2 minutes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, we can hear you.
I can hear you. Can you guys hear me?
You're going to stay there. They're going to pan to you. Can you hear them?
Testing, testing. Can you hear me? Can anyone hear us? That's all that's important. Yes.
My name's Christine. So far I've lost a little bit over 30 pounds. This has been an easy process and the weight's just come off.
Are you wanting to lose weight but don't know how? Have you lost weight only to gain it back? At Boise Weight Loss, these are concerns that we hear every day. And there are many ways to lose weight, but the key is to keep it off. And we believe the only way to do that is by eating real food throughout the weight loss process. We help kickstart your fat-burning metabolism to do 3 things: lose weight, lose inches, and regain your health. And by eating real foods, you have the experience to keep it off. There's no better time than now to decide to get rid of that unwanted fat that's weighing you down. Call Boise Weight Loss today for your free consultation at 208-918-3750. That's 208-918-3750. BoiseWeightLoss.com.
From the KTVB News Group, this is a Decision 2018 special. The debate for State Superintendent of Public Instruction. It's a position that oversees a nearly $1.8 billion budget, sets standards in education, and fights for schools in the legislature. Republican incumbent Sherri Ybarra faces a challenge from Democrat Cindy Wilson. Northwest Nazarene University serves as the backdrop as they debate live on center stage at the Brandt Center to try to win your vote ahead of the election Tuesday, November 6th. This is the debate for Superintendent of Public Instruction. Here is News Channel 7's Dee Sarton.
It's so glad to have you joining us for this important debate, and I want to welcome you to it. We have 2 candidates participating tonight who want your vote next week when we all go to the polls on November 6th, unless you voted early. And they're both vying for the opportunity to be State Superintendent of Public Instruction, a very important role in Idaho. We're glad to have Democratic candidate Cindy Wilson with us this evening and current Superintendent Sherri Ybarra. Thank you for being with us. And also, we're going to get to them, letting them introduce themselves in more depth in just a moment. But first, a reminder that our goal is always to provide the candidates with equal time, but also to encourage a free-flowing discussion that stays on topic. So that will be our challenge today. I want to introduce you to our panelists. They are KTVB journalists Mark Johnson, Kim Fields, Doug Petcash, and Joe Paris is standing by, monitoring Facebook, the comments and discussion going on there. And we also have our KTVB producer, Tyson Miller, here, helping the candidates keep track and kind of pace their time throughout the debate. But now, it is time for the candidates to introduce themselves. You each have 1 minute to do that. And earlier, we did the coin flip, and that determined that Ms. Cindy Wilson, you will be going first.
There's a family in Ashton where the preschool doesn't have room for their child. There's a family in Ingham who are concerned about their child's special needs being met. There's a family in Plummer whose child didn't graduate from high school last spring. These are real Idaho families, and they're ready for change. You're going to hear about my vision, about my leadership, and my advocacy for our kids. And you're going to hear about the differences between my opponent and me. For over 30 years, I've been teaching Idaho children how government works, and I've been attending state legislative committee hearings since 1985. For the last 3 years, I've had the honor of serving Idaho on the State Board of Correction. And on the board, I understand the difference between an accurate needs-based budget and a political flash in the pan. Idaho taxpayers deserve a superintendent who shows up for work, ready to bust their butt to get the job done for kids from day one. I have a strong reputation for getting things done the Idaho way through hard work, through teamwork, and a respect for personal responsibility.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. And now, Sherri Ybarra.
Good afternoon. I'm State Superintendent Sherri Ybarra, and I appreciate very much KTVB for allowing us to speak right to Idahoans tonight about why I believe that I deserve another term as State Superintendent of Public Instruction. My life's work as a teacher, a principal, a district office administrator, and now your State Superintendent is ensuring that your kids get the quality education that they deserve. As I look back over the last 4 years in education, Idaho is leading the nation. Leading, in fact, that our state has been ranked number 5 in the nation for college and career readiness. Number 2, our kids have outperformed nearly every other state in the nation on reading on the National Assessment for Educational Progress. Our graduation rates are rising, our teacher pay is increasing, and we've secured nearly $100 million each year since I took office for education, as well as saved the taxpayers nearly $6 million each year since I took office in internet costs alone. Under my leadership, we've brought our plan for improving education to life. And I believe that our over 300,000 students in Idaho deserve an experienced leader like myself who can continue to lead the state forward and make us all proud. I'm State Superintendent Sherri Ybarra, and I humbly ask for your vote again on November 6th.
Thank you both. I'd like to start off the questions this evening and maybe turn the tables a little bit. It's probably every student's dream to turn the tables on the teachers and the principals, and so here we go. But I would imagine no one is a better student of the other than you two. That's what people do when they're in a race like this. And so I would like to ask each of you to grade your opponent in terms of their contributions to education, and then I'll give you a chance to respond to that. And so, Ms. Ybarra, we'll start with you.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I don't know my opponent very well, but I thank her very much for her service to education. At this point, I think this position is a lot about having an experienced leader like myself to move education forward. We've seen some great gains in Idaho where our graduation rates are on the rise, our math and reading skills are improving. Nearly 2,000 of our students have closed the reading gap on the Idaho Reading Indicator, which is a test that finds our struggling readers. And I think it's important for Idahoans to know that our 300,000 students in Idaho deserve an experienced leader like myself who's had the opportunity to build relationships with the movers and shakers in our state.
But let me ask you though, and kind of going back to this idea that you would kind of expect you would be a student of your opponent and someone who has served in education for many years. The grading system is something you are both very familiar with. Could you give her a grade, and maybe it's just on her ideas or what she's proposing, but give us some idea of what you think of your opponent.
You know, I think it's less about a grade. I don't think it's appropriate at this point to grade my opponent. A grade means a lot of things, and actually in Idaho we're trying to move away from that. I'm hoping someday in our nation that kids will be able to look at us as educators and parents and say, what was an A, Mom? What did that mean? And it should be more about mastery-based education, which we have gotten national recognition for in the state of Idaho. We have states mirroring that legislation. It's just the flexibility in education to give students the responsibility for their learning. Someday, it is my hope and dream that students will move away from grades and more into showing the nation what they know.
I'm sure there's some cheers going on for that. Ms. Wilson, let's turn the tables now and let's grade your opponent and tell us, in terms of her contributions to education, how you would rate her.
You know, it's difficult as a teacher sometimes to give a child the grade that they've earned, but the statistics are very clear. Idaho is really struggling. I've talked to people all across the state who are concerned about our education system. And in Idaho Falls, I heard from employers at the INL and throughout the area there that they're struggling to get high-quality employees to come to our state because of our reputation for education. So because of those statistics and the anecdotal evidence that I've received after traveling across the state, I hesitate to give a failing grade, but I'm going to put it in the D range.
I would imagine that, you know, the things you've mentioned about Idaho in your opening statement and then just now are things that have been said prior to Ms. Ybarra's administration. Mm-hmm. So what specifically about her administration would earn the D?
As I listened to Ms. Ybarra talk about her achievements, they're not real. There's a misperception that Idaho is moving the needle forward. And what we're really seeing is mediocrity and status quo. For example, our graduation rate just this last year was 79.7, and the year before it was 79.7. To celebrate a 0.01% increase is leaving behind so many of our students who are struggling and who aren't graduating. And for everyone who doesn't, that costs our state $1 million.
Chance to respond?
I would. I'm saddened by the fact that my opponent calls herself an educator. Every educator in the state of Idaho understands that it is tough to move a system, especially when it's public education. I like to compare it to putting a sweater on an octopus and trying to get all those arms inside the sweater. Every educator in Idaho knows that our students need the positive momentum to keep them going, and that you celebrate every single success, whether small or large. That student could be anybody in this audience. That one or two students could be your neighbor, your grandchild, your niece, your nephew, and we celebrate every success in education in Idaho.
Quick response, and then I want to get to our next question.
Well, you can sit and try to spin it however you want, but I've been traveling this state for 7 months, and people are telling me their story. And not only that, but just today I was endorsed by a man who typically endorses Republican candidates. He said he'd been talking to Republican leaders from throughout the state and that things just aren't getting done. It's not happening. I want to thank Mr. Vandersloot for supporting my campaign and seeing the vision that we have. We are not satisfied with mediocrity in this state or the status quo. I'm asking for everyone to join me as we partner together with collaboration and real constructive leadership to move the needle forward.
Well, I know that's what we want to talk about as we move down through our questions this evening, because there's a lot of specifics to get to. Mark, would you take it away, please?
Thank you, Dee. You cannot talk about education in this state or any other state without talking about the economics of it. Despite an increase in teacher pay, as you've pointed out, in recent years, we are among the bottom in the nation for teacher pay. Idaho Education News recently reported that we are 12% below the national average at 42nd in the country. And KTVB, our Morgan Boydston, recently reported on Idaho teachers moving to bordering states for better pay or leaving the profession altogether. So the question that parents are asking, how do you make our system better from within, given the finite resources that you have? Your resources are not unlimited, determined by the lawmakers. Where can you find better ways to manage the near $1.8 billion budget, which represents nearly half of Idaho's total state budget? Superintendent, we'll start with you.
I think the best thing that came forward in the crafting of the budget this year was every stakeholder's priority was maintaining that career ladder. And you talk about teacher pay in Idaho, we need to talk about where we've been and where we're going. That's why you need a state superintendent who's been there every step of the way, in turbulent times and in good times. And we're beginning to see the gains from that career ladder. Like I said earlier, when I crafted the budget this year, every stakeholder's #1 priority was for me to ensure that that career ladder was put into place and stayed there to show those increases in teacher pay. Simply put, the career ladder is increments in teacher pay. It was the one of the #1 task force recommendations as well. But we commissioned a report in Idaho to see exactly what is going on. And what we learned is that career ladder was great at attracting and retaining our early teachers or our novice teachers, which I respect all teachers. I was an early teacher at one time. But what it hasn't done is paid respect to the veterans. And you will notice in my budget request this year that we've had increases from anywhere from 3% all the way up to 16% respectively on the top end of the career ladder. The other thing that we're doing is making sure that those veteran teachers will have an opportunity to apply for the master teacher premium on top of those raises that are in that career ladder this year that was in my budget ask as well. You'll see a rural schools initiative, a teacher pipeline initiative in the budget this year as well, giving respect to attracting and retaining great teachers and leaders.
And this is the final year of the career ladder. Is it over and done after that for you?
We're having conversations about that right now. This is the year that you would be doing that moving forward. Every stakeholder group, the funding formula that I'm proud to be a part of, has said we need to keep that career ladder intact as we move forward. And it's not over until we reach that 40, 50, 60 threshold that the task force recommended that we get to.
I believe the question that you asked was, how do we make improvements for teachers in spite of the fact that we have budget restrictions? So the first thing that we need to do is not provide these flash-in-the-pan ideas by putting forward initiatives that are not well thought, that don't have collaboration, that are announced in press releases without real thought. That costs additional money. So let's take a look at what's being suggested in that manner and pull that back in as a savings. The other thing we need to make sure that we do, and I've heard this from superintendents, teachers, school board members across the state as we've been traveling this summer, they want what we call a needs-based budget. That makes sense. Let's find out, what do schools need to get the students to where we want them to be when they graduate from high school? What is that going to cost? And then promote that as a budget, not something that is just thrown out as an amount and say, please meet these needs.
It's been reported that you've criticized your opponent for not engaging more with lawmakers and for not being, I think the word that I read was present. Do you stand by that?
These aren't my words. These are the words of legislators. In a March 29th article just this year, the leader of the House Education Committee commented about the lack of engagement of our current superintendent, saying that she had rarely attended meetings and only met with her once that year. Several other legislators are mentioned in the article as not having talked to her, including the legislator who brings the school budget to the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee, the Budget Committee. This is not something that I created. This is what I've learned from following remarks of legislators and others, and it's frankly a well-known fact across the state. There's a lack of engagement and a lack of hard work to solve these problems for Idaho kids.
Those are strong words, Superintendent.
My opponent has just admitted to you that the way she finds her information is through the media. I think that my track record speaks for itself in the fact that we had an unprecedented record set this year for a unanimous vote for the public schools budget. Statistics don't lie, but politicians do. And my relationship with the legislature is built on a mutual respect, proven that we've gotten nearly $100 million each year since I took office. You can look at my endorsements on my website. We have a great relationship, my team and I, with lawmakers. Statistics don't lie.
Let's move along to Doug Petcash.
We'll start with you, Mrs. Wilson, on this one. Sticking kind of with the career ladder idea, Idaho is still struggling with a teacher shortage with retention and recruitment issues. It sounds like both of you will support some form of continuation of the career ladder pay system, but what else can be done to keep and recruit teachers, especially to our rural areas that may not have the resources that the bigger cities do?
You know, again, we've been traveling across the state all summer long and listening to what people have to say, and our rural districts are really hurting. Some of them had to start school without certified employees in the classroom this year. But the real problem lies in retention. 1 in 4 teachers leaves the state in the first 5 years. That is a cost to our state of a minimum of $6 million every year. And there are figures that show it could go even higher. And that all comes from a report to the State Board of Education. What can we do to keep those teachers besides making sure that the pay is appropriate for the level of experience that we know they have and also for their education and background? We also have to give them flexibility in their classrooms, provide time for teachers to collaborate with one another, to create great lessons, to create authentic assessments, and meet together. You know, when we were in Lapwai, we talked to the superintendent there and some teachers, and they're excited about putting together some time on a Friday afternoon where teachers of content level or grade level meet together to talk about what happened in that previous week with their kids and how they can further make learning happen for them as they move forward into the next week. There are so many exciting things we can do, and as state superintendent, I plan to implement some of those ideas statewide.
Would you also support something along the lines of what some other surrounding states are doing in terms of incentives like loan forgiveness or housing assistance? And if so, where do you get the money for that?
That is absolutely a necessity in our state. I was surprised that when I was talking to a teacher in Burley, she said that it's difficult to find housing on her salary, and she's been teaching for 8 years there. So definitely, if we can look for something that will provide those kind of incentives, I think it will really help our state. And frankly, if we look at it in the long run, what happens? When I'm state superintendent, we have to fix this fleeing of the education profession that we see. Again, 1 in 4 teachers leaves the state in the first 5 years. So if we can save that money there and then add that into some of these programs that we're looking at, particularly something I want to look at is the paraprofessionals that are in our rural districts. We know they're great with kids. They want to stay in their community. Let's find a way for them to get a teaching certificate and teach in our schools.
And of course, Superintendent Ybarra, I want to get your take on this. And over your time in office, are you seeing a difference in the number of teachers who are staying in rural schools? We know that's still a challenge to keep or recruit. Do you believe more needs to be done to particularly address that population of Idaho?
As your state superintendent of public instruction, that was one of our top 3 goals, was attracting and retaining great teachers and leaders. And the career ladder was a great start, but we need to keep an eye on that. You will see in my budget exactly what you just talked about, which was an initiative, teacher pipeline initiative that's asking for money for a type of a loan forgiveness program and rewards those for staying in our rural areas. There's teacher compensation, and then there's teacher satisfaction. And we need to look at all of that. We need to stop talking about teachers as if we don't trust them. We need to be sincere. We need to stop acting like, oh, you'll come to me later. And we need to have more positive conversations around accountability and learning and parental involvement. We need to invest more in mentoring as well, and you will see all of those items in my budget as we move forward.
Do you see a day when teachers aren't paying $750 to $1,000 out of their own pocket for classroom supplies?
Teachers do things behind the scenes every day, and no matter how, if we had all the money in the world for education, teachers have a big heart, and they're going to continue to do those things for our kids. I can speak to that as a former 3rd grade teacher, but we do need to keep an eye on teacher pay. We do have an educator shortage, and I'm the superintendent that's been there through it all, making sure that our teachers are respected, changing the culture, and making sure that our public schools budget reflect exactly that.
May I respond to that? I hear Ms. Ybarra saying, I plan to do this. The superintendent has had 4 years to make this happen. And yet the shortage of teachers, qualified teachers, teachers who have been teaching for a while is getting worse. And I know that. I've been talking to them all across the state. We have to do something starting the day that I take office, and I promise you, I'll collaborate with leaders from across the state to make that happen.
Response?
Yes. You know, it's unfortunate to me that my opponent hasn't been paying attention to everything that we have been doing to solve the educator shortage. It is not one person's responsibility in this state. We have done things like support the alternative authorization route. We have strengthened our relationship with ABCTE. We have had job fairs. We are out there supporting schools and districts. You will see the budget reflecting, like I said earlier, teachers have gotten raises anywhere from 3% all the way up to 16% respectively on the career ladder. They need a state superintendent with that kind of experience moving forward that will continue to have their back as we work on this national issue, not just in Idaho alone.
Thank you both.
And Kim Fields.
I want to focus a little bit on school safety. After Saturday's shooting at a synagogue in Pittsburgh, President Trump again raising the question of having armed guards at places of worship, just as he did after the Parkland school shooting in Florida, and the president also called then for arming teachers. I'll start with Mrs. Wilson. Is that the answer to school safety in Idaho? Arming teachers, hiring armed guards, and if so, would you mandate it?
As a teacher, nothing tugs your heartstrings more than the thought that you're responsible for protecting your students. And it's difficult to even imagine that, but we have to be prepared. Our state legislature created the Office of School Safety and Security, and their exact job is to do that, to go into our schools and to prepare audits to find out how prepared we are and to determine how to keep our students and teachers safe in the schools. What they're finding is that the best way to make that happen is not more guns. In fact, it's dealing with what is actually an underlying problem, and that is that our students today are feeling anxiety, depression, loneliness, and suicidal thoughts. How do we help them to become whole, to be able to speak with one another civilly and have a respect for one another's differences? That has to start in the early grades, and that's why I'm promoting something I've been doing my entire career. So when I'm state superintendent, what you will see is more civics in school. Civics means that we have a love of our history in this country, that we have an understanding of our Constitution and our government, but most importantly, that we use democratic principles in the classroom, teach children how to get along with one another, how to respect their differences, how to create a sense of community. That's the long-term goal that we need in our schools.
Superintendent Ybarra, is arming teachers and hiring armed guns the answer for school safety in Idaho?
That is exactly why I brought forward the Keep Idaho Students Safe initiative. Safety is everybody's responsibility, and I am appalled as the mother of a public school student to hear my opponent lay that with another organization at the state. Now, do we have to work together collaboratively? Absolutely. But I understand that there has been a murder in Utah of a student, a shooting of a stabbing of a Georgia teacher. When I was in Riggins traveling for Capitol for a day, a parent stood up and showed their cell phone to me. It was the day of the Texas shooting. And he looked at me and said, "Superintendent Ybarra, what are you going to do about this?" And I said, "It's the KISS initiative, Keep Idaho Students Safe." It has been endorsed by the principal of the Columbine High School, who said to me, "Superintendent Ybarra, the last thing that Idahoans want ingrained in their mind is the last few minutes of a student's life under a desk begging for their life." I am going to move forward with this. I know this is what Idahoans want, and I'm going to fight vigorously for the safety of our students.
Superintendent, you mentioned it's everyone's responsibility. Is there a reason that you waited until the last year of your term to launch the KISS initiative? We received that press release announcing the KISS initiative in March of 2018.
That is simply just not the facts. You know, I am on the record for saying in January of last year, when I pitched our budget proposal to JFAC, that something was coming around the safe and drug-free schools line item, that we needed to do more to keep our students safe. I had told everybody from day one, taking office, that this would be the next phase of the bullying initiative. Safety is not only about shootings. Safety is about making sure our students have access to counselors and training around those things that affect our students, such as bullying and harassment, suicide, all those ills that our kids are dealing with today. So this is the third phase of the bullying initiative that I started from day one when I walked in my office, and you can follow that timeline on the State Department of Education's website. I invite everybody to take a look at that.
May I respond to that for just a moment also?
Sure. Can I just jump in real quickly, though? So for people who aren't as familiar with your KISS initiative, and to Kim's point, then where do you stand on armed teachers or other staff members in schools?
We already have legislation that allows school districts to make that decision. That is not the job of the state superintendent. I'm an educator and a firm believer in our Second Amendment right. I am also the wife of a law enforcement officer and an Air Force veteran. We believe in the right to bear arms, but I know as an educator that is not my expertise, and I would not feel comfortable with it. That is a local decision.
Okay, so you wouldn't work against that in terms of a district deciding like 3 have in Idaho. And Ms. Wilson, how about you? How would you support local districts that feel that's necessary?
Absolutely. And by the way, I am also the wife of a law enforcement official, and I have 3 sons who've gone through the public schools, and 2 of them are veterans, as is my husband. So I can relate completely to what it means to be a gun owner in Idaho. And I happen to be the best shot in my family. But anyway, with that said, I would tell you that Idaho school districts do have the right to make that decision if they like. Idaho code allows them that opportunity, and I don't have any plan to stop them from doing that, but it doesn't make sense to put a Band-Aid on a problem. We need a long-term solution to get something happening.
All right, let's go to Doug.
Thank you, Dee. I believe we'll start with Superintendent Ybarra this time. Idaho is one of 5 states right now that doesn't fund pre-K, preschool. Would you like to mandate that? Why or why not?
Mandate that? I don't think anybody in Idaho wants the government to raise their 4-year-old. As the mother of a public school student, I understand that parents need resources, opportunities, and access. We've already been having those conversations in the state of Idaho. What I brought forward in partnership with the State Board of Education is the Smarty Ants program, which all 4-year-olds in Idaho is a free opportunity to curriculum on any device that they may own. Is it the answer? Absolutely not. But it is the beginning of that conversation moving forward to offering resources. We already have school districts partnering with their local communities to offer early education to our students. This should not be a mandate. And I will give you one other true story. My son is a senior this year in high school, and I did not send him to kindergarten until he was 6 years old, because he was academically ready, but he was not socially ready. And as his mother, I enjoyed a local control state that allows me as a parent to make that decision for him. And he is doing well. He is a great student in the Mountain Home School District, very proud of him. But I understand that parents in Idaho need those resources. That's actually how we will close the gap to reading in Idaho. That's actually how kids will gain vocabulary skills. We also have something in place called Pay for Success that my staff had a meeting with that team today to look at more resources and opportunities for the 4-year-olds in the state of Idaho moving forward for a plan for that as well. I also understand that our next governor, who has endorsed me in this race, Lieutenant Governor Brad Little, also agrees that we need more resources for our students moving forward for early education.
So let me rephrase just a little bit too. I didn't mean mandate in the sense that kids would have to go to the school, but mandating the availability of pre-K for Idaho students should their parents decide to send them there.
So it's interesting.
Publicly funded.
It's interesting to me that kindergarten is not even mandated in the state of Idaho, but everybody in Idaho, nearly 90% of Idahoans take advantage of that. So I think it's interesting that we do need to have resources. They do need to be available, and using that example tells me that parents will take advantage of the resource if it's available.
Okay. Mrs. Wilson, what are your thoughts on the state providing pre-K education?
Well, one of the characteristics of great leaders is to listen. So that's what we've been doing as we've crossed the state, is to listen to what people have to say. And we know that last year a poll was commissioned, and that poll found that 76% of Idahoans support a preschool program. And that actually rises to 80% when parents were questioned about it. So we know that Idahoans want something that they can use to help their children, something besides an electronic device. So how do we make this happen? Well, there are already opportunities available through partnering with the Idaho Association of the Education of Young Children that is going into communities and providing grant money to bring civic leaders, private preschool teachers, school districts together to create a plan of how they can provide an opportunity for every single child in that community to have a preschool seat. Well, one of the things that we've heard also as we've been traveling is first grade teachers telling this story. They can start their school year with their classroom. Half the students might have had preschool, kindergarten, and they come ready to learn and they're excited about it. But a study that was done this last summer showed that 50% of children who come into kindergarten do not have the skills to be able to learn how to read. We have a serious problem because our first grade teachers are telling us they need something to help kids prepare. And if you know a 4-year-old child, they're like little sponges ready to learn. They can't wait to find out about all kinds of questions that they have. They're so curious.
Just real quickly on the follow-up, as I said, Idaho is one of 5 states that doesn't fund pre-K. Should Idaho fund pre-K? You were talking about community partnerships, but should the state fund it?
You know what I'm hearing is that the first thing we need to do is make full-day kindergarten available for every Idaho child, and then we can start looking at funding for a preschool program. But it shouldn't be mandated in preschool, but it should be a partnership within the community to make it happen.
Kim Fields with our next question.
I want to talk about graduation rates. You both mentioned it in your opening statements. I believe we're starting with Mrs. Wilson.
I think we've been kind of fluid with that, but that
Okay.
would probably be the proper flow at
to
this
go to
point.
with
yeah.
Mrs. Wilson. You mentioned that you thought the graduation rates were flat. When you look at individual school districts, their graduation rates, some of them are on par, if not better than the national average. 16 of Idaho's high schools graduated 100% of their eligible seniors. The Kuna School District graduating 86%, West Ada 85, Boise 83, and these are numbers according to the Department of Education's website. Yet there are high schools within West Ada and Boise, some of them alternative high schools, that have some of the lowest graduation rates in the state. That suggests that perhaps the most vulnerable students are more at risk. So what would you do? What is the answer to the graduation rate for our most vulnerable students?
Yes. And for every child who doesn't graduate from high school in our state, it costs our state up to $1 million. So there are over 4,000 students who are not graduating. And we also know that this achievement gap between who's achieving and who isn't is getting larger and larger and larger. So one of the things that I want to do when I'm state superintendent is move beyond our advanced opportunities classes, which give students college credit early as they start attending college. But there's a whole group of students who are either don't have the aptitude for that or don't have the desire for that. So let's beef up our vocational technical opportunities for kids. You know, let's get them out into the community to find out what choices are available for them. I would like to partner with the Department of Labor and also with other departments within the state to find out what are the jobs that are available for kids today and show them how they can make a good, honest living either in the trades or with a certificate to really be successful and to become taxpayers that can contribute to our funds.
So I think that's probably speaking more to the go-on rate for post-secondary education, whether it be a 2 or 4 year schooling or technical school. I'm interested in high school graduation rates, what you would do to get them to walk across that stage, to get their degree, to perhaps then go on to technical or
Yes,
2 or 4 year.
Absolutely, and I've been teaching seniors for the past 20 years, so I get this. I've been working with them every single day as a teacher in their classroom. You have to engage them. And how do we engage them? We have to let them know how to apply their knowledge that they're learning. And that's where the vocational technical track is going to be helpful. Because if they can have a vision of where they want to go with their education and what it can mean to them in their future, they get excited about that and they want to stay in school. You know, there are some great programs happening all across this state. Let's take a look at those pockets of excellence. That's what I want to do when I'm state superintendent, is have the folks who are getting this, making it happen, bring them in, and let's spread it across the state. But too many of our vulnerable population are falling through the cracks. And I know this so well because I've talked to the young people whose needs we did not meet.
Superintendent, you want to respond to that?
Yes. It's not what you want to do, it's what we are doing. And I am pleased to hear you talk about those graduation rates on the State Department of Education's website. We do have schools and districts that are graduating our kids at 100%. I said earlier, statistics don't lie. Our graduation rate is going up, and our teachers in Idaho need to be commended for that great work. I think the one thing that Nickleby did do well for us, if it did anything well for us, was to point out the achievement gaps in our special populations. That's unacceptable. And you mentioned earlier that the majority of those low graduation rates are in something that educators already knew, is our alternative schools that serve our special populations, our at-risk youth. And that's why we have academies in Idaho called the Idaho Youth Challenge Academy, which really speaks well to how, thank goodness, we have alternative schools to help those students. The Idaho Youth Challenge Academy is one of those alternative schools that really connects with students to keep them engaged. A lot of these students have been exposed to traumatic incidences, to poverty. That's really hard on our students, but we have to make a connection with them. We have to have those programs in place so that we can reach them and close those achievement gaps. The other thing that we are doing as a state is we are looking at going in and giving those schools a menu-based approach to helping those achievement gaps. Less of, I'm here to tell you what to do, and more of, here's what works to help keep kids engaged. Programs like college, career technical education, where we have over 80,000 students in Idaho who are participating in those programs, making sure our kids have more of those offerings, making sure that we have Idaho Youth Challenge Academy opportunities for students who are at risk, making sure that we're making those connections out into the public, community services that are available, and a leader in those schools who understands how to make a connection with those kids to keep them engaged.
I mentioned the graduation rates at some of the districts. I just want to give credit where credit is due in terms of, you know, those schools and those teachers. The overall graduation rate, though, Superintendent, was in 2017 79.67%. In 2016, it was 79.66. That's an increase of 1/100 of a percentage point. Is that really an increase in your eyes, though? Or is it flat? Is it stagnant?
As I stated earlier, public education is much like trying to put a sweater on an octopus. And to any gain that we make in public education is to be celebrated. Our kids need that. We know as educators in a classroom, you do not look at a third grade student and say, why did you not learn to multiply? What is wrong with you? You can't catch it. What you say to those kids is every time they make a gain, we are proud of you, and we are proud of those gains in Idaho. We are going to continue to see them because every educator in Idaho knows we celebrate all successes. Those students that you're talking about, that is somebody's grandkid, that is somebody's neighbor, that could be somebody in the audience right now, and we're proud of you. The other thing is Idaho is growing exponentially. Everybody wants to be a part of Idaho. Everybody wants to move here. And that just shows how hard our educators are working to make sure that we close the achievement gaps for every student in Idaho.
I can see Ms. Wilson wanting
Yes.
to jump in.
Well, there she goes again, talking about how great Idaho's scores are and how great the graduation rate is. Every state around us has a better graduation rate. Ours is stagnant. I'll tell you what, when I'm superintendent, I do not settle for mediocrity, and I don't settle for status quo. Ms. Ybarra has had 4 years to increase and create a difference in education, and it just hasn't happened. We need someone new. It's time for change.
Give you an opportunity to quickly respond.
Our moderator already quoted the statistics that our high schools are working hard. Some of them have a 100% graduation rate. Statistics don't lie. Politicians do.
I won't let one child, one vulnerable child, slip through the cracks, I promise you.
Let's move along to Mark and our next question.
Superintendent, you mentioned school choice. Let's move there. Traditional public schools and charter schools, public charter schools, along with online learning, homeschooling, and non-state funded private schools. And specifically, Devin Bodkin recently reported in the Idaho Education News that nearly 11,000 Idaho school children are on a waiting list right now to get into their charter school of choice. So along those lines, specifics, do you support expansion?
What I support wholeheartedly is a parent's right to choose. I expressed earlier how I made a choice for my son as a kindergarten student, and I will continue to make sure that our parents have choices, whatever that is. It could be a charter school, it could be traditional public school, it could be a private school. Parents have the right to make those choices for their children, and I will support what is right for kids. The other thing I want to let the public know is I enjoy a great relationship with our charter schools. We have a charter school division in my department. We work very well with them. Again, if kids are suffering for whatever reason, and I'm not saying it would be the fault of a school district, I'm saying if they're suffering for any reason whatsoever, and a parent decides to put them in a school of choice, I'm going to back whatever's best for a student.
But would you support expansion of the charter school system?
I am going to support whatever is great for kids. And you mentioned yourself that there are 11,000 kids on a waiting list. We have new charter schools through my division popping up all the time. I have not once stopped any of that.
You mentioned you'd support, private schools as well. Would you go so far as to support vouchers at some point?
That is where it stops for me. I am the superintendent of public instruction. As it is, there's not enough funds to go around for education. And so when you look at my title, superintendent of public instruction, anything that takes money away from public schools, I am not going to support.
Mark, did you want to follow up with Ms. Wilson here?
Yes, I believe in choice for parents. What I would like to do as state superintendent is make every school a school of choice. The problem lies in the reality of what happens every time we create a new school of choice. That costs money. So Idahoans need to look very carefully at what we want, with the consideration that when we create a new school district, which is what we're creating every time we have a new charter school, we need to fund that. I love the idea of having that available to people if the funding is secure to meet the needs of every school district or charter school or public school in this state. But the reality is there's only so much money to go around, and we have to be very specific as how we spend that money.
The reality also is that those charter schools don't get property tax money, so they're not taxing the local residents to support that school. Overall spending less for charter schools, and then the money follows the students. So I'm not sure I understand exactly what you're saying in terms of if there's money available. What do you mean by that in terms of supporting charter schools?
Yes, absolutely. Let's support choice, but we have to put the money into supporting it.
All right. Mark, did you have anything else you wanted to follow up with on that?
No, we've got still a lot more to cover here.
Oh, we do, and the time is getting away from us. Let me ask you a little bit about party affiliation. It's been interesting watching this race and endorsements. I've been mentioned already this evening. Ms. Wilson, you have a D behind your name on the ballot, and Ms. Ybarra, you have an R. How much does your party affiliation represent your view when it comes to how Idaho should be governed overall? And let me just explain why I asked this question. The things that touch our kids, all the social ills, all the things that people are grappling with in terms of their own party affiliation, cross over into issues that come up in our schools. And so how would you say your party affiliation represents your view when it comes to how Idaho should govern overall? And we could keep our answers fairly quick. Ms. Ybarra.
I am a proud Republican and a conservative, but it was Jerry Evans, one of the greatest superintendents of all time in Idaho, he's known for that, that said, our students don't come to school with little R's and D's stamped in their forehead. However, when it comes to having a strong base in Idaho and being a conservative leader, you will see that in all the policies. I am a superintendent first, and I make sure the students of Idaho come first in everything that I do. But I am a proud conservative Republican.
And Ms. Wilson.
I would agree. Children do not come to school with little R's and D's on their forehead. This should not be a partisan office. This should be an office that takes care of every single Idaho child. For that reason, I have been talking to people in both parties, and I'm proud to say that I have support from people who are Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, have no party, because they see me as a person who gets things done. And I would go back to Mr. Vandersloot's endorsement today. He said, I've been talking to Republican leaders across this state, and they're telling me it's time for change. We need new leadership. Don't make this a partisan issue and politicize our children's education.
Let me ask you, who are you going to vote for governor?
I will vote for the person who best fits the ideas that I have for education policy.
And that's why I'm asking the question. So very, very good response. I think that's what people want to know, is who best represents your views.
Well, I've been very forthright about how I'll vote on the props. Quite frankly, I'm still deciding on that one.
How will you vote on the props?
I am voting no on Prop 1. Mainly because of the Attorney General's decision that he believes that's probably unconstitutional under the Idaho Constitution. So I would say if we want to continue to pursue that, let's get a constitutional amendment added to the state constitution. On Prop 2, I believe in whatever can help children, and I believe that providing them the health care in their family that they need for working Idahoans will benefit them and help them to learn better.
Ms. Ybarra, I'll ask you the same question on the governor's race in Prop 1 and 2.
I'm going to go in that booth and vote just like every other Idahoan. On the propositions, it is not appropriate for me to use my constitutional authority to sway voters. That's the reason it's on the ballot, Props 1 and Props 2. It is not appropriate for me to sway voters. But I think if you look at my endorsements, it is going to be very obvious who I'm voting for governor. I am a conservative Republican leader who has the backing of every constitutional officer in this state. And our next governor will be Lieutenant Governor Brad Little.
I'm going to push you just a little bit on Prop 1, since education funding is a piece of that, and you're a leader in that world, and people probably are looking to you to see what you think, because that's a big consideration in how anyone casts that vote. So I'll push you on that. I think people would appreciate knowing how you're going to vote on Prop 1.
I understand that, but again, because I'm in a position of authority, I think you can figure out that I am a firm supporter of education, but it's not appropriate to use my position to sway the voters. That's why it's on the ballot. The legislature is not going to make the decision. The people of Idaho get to make the decision. They can investigate, they can read, and they can make that choice for themselves.
May I just comment on that for a moment?
Quickly, we're about out of time.
Just quickly. This is an issue that I hear about from education leaders and teachers across the state. They're frustrated that Ms. Ybarra doesn't take a position on education issues regularly. In fact, this recent debate on science standards, when the legislators turned to her and asked, "What do you think?" she gave it back to them and said, "What do you think?" The Idaho Superintendent of Public Instruction needs to lead the state on education issues. And frankly, it's time to make a change.
Ms. Ybarra, quickly.
My track record speaks for itself. Did those science standards get through? Yes, they did. Did we get nearly $100 million for education ever since I've taken office? Yes, we have. Have you seen the State Board of Education vote for everything that's come forward? Yes, you have. Have you seen the Idaho legislature unanimously vote for the public schools budget last year? Yes, you did. Statistics don't lie. Politicians do.
Give you one more chance, Ms. Wilson, to respond to that.
I don't know about being a politician, but I've been a teacher for 33 years, and I've been traveling the state, and I have a good understanding of what people are saying. And people are saying, we want strong leadership from the state superintendent, and that's what I plan to provide in that position.
All right, we are just about out of time. Anybody have a quick question that can be answered quickly that you'd like to throw out? Doug?
I'll throw it out real quickly. Maybe in 10 seconds each from you. What do you see as the biggest challenge facing education in Idaho?
I'll start. The educator shortage is one of the biggest challenges, along with the funding formula that we're looking at, and I'm a proud member of that committee. It's a challenge, as well as making sure that that safety initiative gets through. That is a challenge for all parents, including myself as a mother of a public school student. So we have the educator shortage, we have the funding formula that we'll be tackling, God willing, that I return as your state superintendent of public instruction.
And Mrs. Wilson, briefly, what do you see as the biggest challenge?
Yes, there are 3 areas that we really want to focus on when I become superintendent. Number 1 is student achievement and engagement. Number 2 is teacher recruitment, but mainly retention. And number 3 is early childhood education to make sure that our kids are ready to read by 3rd grade.
Thank you.
All right, well, we're about out of time, so I want to give you each ample opportunity for closing statements to hit any of those issues that perhaps you didn't hit on earlier. Might mention that I've noticed on Facebook, Joe, we've got quite a few people asking about standardized tests, so if you want to throw that into your closing statement, feel free, but we'll give you a chance to do that now, and we will start with you, Ms. Wilson.
Tonight, you've heard the differences between my opponent and me. Over and over, you've heard her say that the numbers speak for themselves. If I were her, I'd be running away from the numbers because they aren't that great. We need a leader who can look at trends in education and in how the numbers are stacking up for every child in Idaho, not just those who are doing well, but the gap in achievement is getting larger. The graduation rate has been stagnant for 4 years, and frankly, anything really positive that's happened in education has been a result of the task force recommendations. I served on that task force. I heard the discussion, and I saw what we intended. And I think I would have done a better job implementing it myself. We need new leadership. What I can bring to the table, number one, I believe in collaborating with others. Number two, I won't provide unsubstantiated claims about increases in achievement. Number three, I'll show up for meetings and I'll engage from day one. And number four, I will travel this state and listen to the needs of our Idaho taxpayers, parents, school board members, superintendents. Ladies and gentlemen, the superintendent has continually said, don't change horses in the middle of a stream. I'm advocating that you change riders because we're going the wrong direction.
We need to wrap. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Now, Ms. Ybarra.
Thank you all so much to the viewers for listening to this debate, and to KTVB for hosting it, and the moderators for keeping us on time. And I'd like to quote the author Collins of the book, From Good to Great. An effective leader is someone who has experience and knows that it takes a plan and a vision to sustain positive changes in a large organization. Effective leaders like myself know what to throw out that's not working and what to keep that is in Idaho. And good leaders also recognize that education really has two beneficiaries: the student being educated and then everyone else in Idaho. So this election will not only affect our student achievement, but also the trajectory path of our state. And I know that we as people want to continue to see our students flourish and thrive. I think about the over 300,000 students who deserve a state superintendent like myself, who has the proven track record of success, the educational background to continue to lead us from good to great. I'm State Superintendent Sherri Ybarra, and I humbly ask for your support once again on November 6th.
Well, like good educators who know how to do class management, you've ended a little bit early on time, which is that never happens. So I'm going to ask you, because we really have had folks asking about what your views are on standardized tests. Okay, so you have 30 seconds, and let's start with you, Ms. Wilson.
Thank you, thank you. You know, as a classroom teacher, I have seen too much focus on standardized tests. Please, can we let teachers teach? Teachers know what their students need. Teachers can give authentic assessments. Let's find out what we want kids to learn. Let's let the teachers create great lessons to make that happen in collaboration with other teachers. And then let's offer them the opportunity to create authentic assessments to determine where students are.
All right, and now we need to move to Ms. Ybarra.
As state superintendent, I know that there's two kinds of testing, one for accountability and one for student progress. I think that's the one thing that the new ESSA law is still weak in, the Every Student Succeeds Act is still focusing on that end of the year assessment. Our kids are more than just a test score, and parents want to see more of that motion picture of growth over time. So it's about what we do with that information. It's about a state superintendent who can have conversations about the two kinds of testing and make sure that we move towards a motion picture of growth over time. That is exactly why we adopted a new accountability system in Idaho, what we're trying to portray for Idahoans.
All right, thank you both again. Appreciate your participation. Glad you've joined us, and be right back here in half an hour as the candidates for governor take the stage here at the NNU Branch Center. We'll see you at 5:30.
coming through during the debate. We're going to get to those here in a little bit. I'm listening to our Brian Holmes right now to see where we're at. Okay, so they're at the top of the 5 o'clock news right now on KTVB. So we've got a few minutes to kill before we get on to the news at 5. Doug, I know you're sitting here real quickly. Instant reaction to the debate. What did you think?
Strong. I really thought that it showed areas where they have differences. I thought they both performed well, stated their cases well. There's always a bit of an advantage for an incumbent. They have a record in that office to stand by. You heard Superintendent Ybarra talk a lot about the different things that she has instituted over the last 4 years, and also the difficulty of putting a sweater on an octopus.
That had my attention of the most. I was monitoring the Facebook comments, and that really perked my ears. That's one of my new favorite analogies. When we talk to voters about the biggest differences between candidates, they like to watch these debates to find out those answers. For some of our viewers that are just tuning in that missed this debate, what would you say the biggest differences would be? Maybe just 1 or 2 of them. I know that's a tough question, and I just kind of threw it at you.
Let's see. We talked for 60 minutes.
That's
about
right. So boil it down to 30 seconds, Doug.
Oh my goodness. The biggest difference.
2 candidates?
Yeah.
Yeah. Morgan, why don't you come sit on this side?
Well, because
or to someone else?
over here. Is that okay?
Yeah, you can switch over. This is just for Facebook. Yeah.
Oh, for
Come on
Facebook.
over. This
you
is
want
just for
me here.
Facebook.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. I'm playing musical
Anyway.
The biggest difference, I think, what stood out was the difference of their take on what is the definition of a successful graduation rate.
Yeah.
And how you read the numbers. Superintendent said you applaud any improvement in any student, and I think that's what she's meaning, is that she should be applauded because there was some movement, even if it was 100th of a percentage point. And Mrs. Wilson saying, don't trust those numbers necessarily, or trust the numbers, but don't trust the superintendent's assessment of those, and saying that we need change because she hasn't done enough in 4 years.
That was my biggest takeaway as well. When you talk about the biggest differences, and that was also something that Ybarra was targeted at during an attack ad put out last week, put out by Idaho Education Association, was the stagnant graduation rate. And when you look at it, it was 79.66 to 79.67%. You can argue that there really wasn't a change, but at the same time, there was a change. It was 1/100th of a point, and Ybarra said this evening, she said, any improvement should be applauded, any improvement we should be proud of. Ms. Wilson said, no, it's not good enough, and I wouldn't be happy with that, and we need to ask for more. So there's one very specific conversation that they had here tonight, but it is interesting.
They also both, of course, believe very strongly in protecting our children, our school children, and teachers in schools. They have very different ideas, though, about how that process should have gone about, whereas the superintendent has come up with her plan, the KISS plan, Keep Idaho's Students Safe, without a lot of input from the Idaho Office of School Safety and Security, which Mrs. Wilson believes should have been more collaboration on. So.
There you go. Well, Doug, thank you so much for joining us. I know that you've got an early morning, so we will see you.
So do you.
Well, no, it's not about me. It's about you. This is about you. We're less than 2 minutes away to joining the KTVB News at 5.
And you're set for makeup.
And I'm set. No, I'm good. Lan and I already talked. Are we going to do a little one? Oh, we're good. Oh, Doug.
I'm done.
He's done. Okay. All right. How you doing? This is live on Facebook, just so you know. We're live on Facebook right now. You're seeing it right in front of the camera, but we're good. Good to see you, though. We'll chat after. As Paulette Jordan's campaign manager, Nate Kelly. All right. So, Morgan, I'm tuning in here.
Okay.
I think we've got about a minute till we go on the news at 5. We're here with our viewers
you going live?
on Facebook. We both are. We're both live on the news at 5.
Okay.
Here's your microphone, Morgan.
We'll see you later, Joe, and I'll see you in the morning.
I'll see you in the morning, Doug. Have a good one. So this is live on Facebook. Things are just kind of happening. People walking around. It's kind of exciting. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know who's going to stop by. If you're just joining us, though, we are in our halftime coverage essentially for our debate doubleheader here tonight at the Brandt Center at NNU. Paul Belke, our photographer, showing you as we have the stage being set here for the governor's debate coming up at 5:30. And in less than 30 seconds, we're going to be joining the KTVB News at 5, already in progress. And we will be checking in with Brian Holmes and the crew on the news at 5 to update them about the latest going on here at the Brandt Center. Our Morgan Boydston now joining me. I'm Joe Paris, of course, here with you all night long. We'll check in with the news at 5, and then we're going to chat a little bit, light up until 5:30, and then at 5:30 we'll have the debate. A 90-minute debate between Paulette Jordan and Brad Little, and we're just going to stand by now for the news at 5. All right, we're standing by here.
Do we have a megaphone?
Stand by. We're standing by for the news at 5.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Okay, yeah, that would be.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, Senator Morgan Boyson also joining us here this evening. We're also live on Facebook right now, Brian. So after this segment, you can join on and continue the conversation here. But yes, coming up at 5:30, we will have our state governor debate between Representative Paulette Jordan and Brad Little, the lieutenant governor right now here for the state of Idaho. We also have a megaphone question coming up that we're going to show you about who you are voting for. And it's interesting to look at these polls, Morgan, because it's not a scientific poll, but it is interesting to gauge who people are voting for.
Right, and if we look at the poll from the superintendent's debate, that is no longer here, but it had Cindy Wilson and current Superintendent Sherri Ybarra up on who will you vote for, and I believe that Cindy Wilson won that poll. Again, subjective, it is just those folks that were able to tune in and watch, and those that are on social media, on Facebook, casting their votes. Right now on Facebook Live, we have who will you vote for, either Paulette Jordan, Brad Little, or other, so you do have the opportunity to cast that vote, and we can share those results for you after the debate.
And if you want to vote on that, you go right now to ktvb.com/vote or to the KTVB app. You can click on the Vote Now icon, and we'll look at the final results at the end of the debate. So coming up at 5:30 p.m., that's when the debate will start. We're actually live on Facebook right now, so you can join Morgan and I, and we'll have some other people joining us as well to preview that governor's debate. And also, after the debate, which you can catch on Channel 7, on Facebook, on YouTube, as well as KTVB.com, we're going to have our post show where we will be breaking down the debate. Morgan, quickly, before we toss back to the News at 5 crew, what are you looking at for tonight's debate?
Lots of topics, and we're kind of piggybacking off of what we covered in the Idaho Public Television debate. It was an hour long. Tonight's is 90 minutes, and we are going over so many topics, such as corrections, such as infrastructure and growth, such as education funding, transparency. You know, I think that there have been a lot of lingering questions out there people still want answered, and we aren't, unfortunately, going to be able to cover everything. But the big important issues we'll be able to cover right now. One of the major topics people are talking about is public lands, and we have a lot of questions on social media and just after our stories about the Wilkes brothers. So that's something that'll be touched on tonight. A lot of topics covered: health care, mental health care, the doctor shortage across Idaho, the teacher shortage. So really endless amounts of topics.
And that's coming up at 5:30. Many ways to watch right here on Channel 7, as well as our Facebook page and KTVB.com. Brian, for now, we will send it back to you. We'll check in again at 5:30 for the kickoff of our Democratic and Republican governor's debate. All right, so we're clear from the News at 5. Carly, our producer, thank you very much. We're now back with you here on Facebook. We never left.
We never left.
We were here the whole time.
People were probably just really confused when we were silent.
Why we're just silently looking at each other.
Yes.
But, you know, that's live broadcast.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us. Let's reset. As you just heard on our live report for the News at 5, coming up in about 22 minutes exactly, we will have Paulette Jordan and Lieutenant Governor Brad Little here for a big debate.
And this is the final debate.
Final debate, 8 days away from Election Day.
8 days away, and so you do have an opportunity tonight, I believe, to hear more in-depth answers to a lot of the topics that have been previously covered. Because we are allowing them 90 minutes, the candidates are able to go into depth about what specifically Are there plans in terms of funding or in terms of implementing certain career ladders or other initiatives for education? And so I know that Melissa Davlin, who you just saw, maybe perhaps
Hi, Melissa.
pop in.
You're going to come on over.
Oh, you don't have to
Come
yet.
on over. You don't have
but
to.
I
You
know
can.
Melissa Davlin. It's
Come here. Take a seat.
You're fine.
Okay.
All right,
Idaho
Melissa
Public
Davlin.
Television.
She's one of my
She
favorites.
is- and Melissa, you're covering
You're welcome.
you're covering a plethora of issues, but one of the things that I know you really wanted to touch on that I thought was interesting, because I dug into it last week, was Brad Little and his company's, his company and his son's lease agreements with an oil and gas company.
Absolutely, and oil and gas has been such a hot topic in the legislature for years now. With Brad Little having an oil and gas permit that he's said in past interviews that have expired at this point, they're not active. It still raised some questions among the Jordan campaign as to whether or not he can fairly arbitrate issues involving public land. Remember, I mean, this was on his private land. It was a lease that he entered into. So it's a wonky type topic, but it also does affect a lot of people when you're talking about water issues and land use.
And to go off of that, you also, I think I saw your question, and something that we dug into in campaign finance reports is Brad Little, unlike Paulette Jordan, is getting a lot of his campaign contributions from PACs and from extremely wealthy donors. And Brad has Select Health. He's got some other health insurance companies. He's got Molina Healthcare, and so he's got that $5,000 donation coming in from a lot of different interests. Right. So from your perspective, is that a conflict of interest?
Well, I don't know that from my perspective it's a conflict of interest, but it does raise some questions among voters that I've seen, when it comes to issues like environmental regulation, the insurance market, things like that. Are you going to listen more to the stakeholders who are giving you a lot of money, or are you going to listen to people with concerns? The flip side of that is Paulette Jordan has gotten money from out-of-state people in a lot of California donors, and so it's not that one is evil and one is good, but it does raise questions among voters that I've seen online on social media on both sides.
And that goes back to transparency, and that's a topic that we're going to cover in depth tonight, and I know we covered it in our IPTV debate as well.
Yes.
You're fine. Was my question personally for both these candidates is, are you going to be transparent about the people that you're associating yourself with, either in your private life, professional life, and then as governor, but also, are you going to be accessible to the media?
Right. And that's such a big thing.
Yeah.
Because it's not about us, and it's not about getting the story. It really is about delivering the news to the people who are watching and reading at home, and the voters and the constituents. It's not about glory for the reporters. So when we ask about media accessibility, it's not about the people sitting at this desk. It's about you at home.
Exactly.
We're standing by 15 minutes away from the debate tonight between Lieutenant Governor Brad Little and Representative Paulette Jordan. They're those top candidates on the ballot for Idaho's next governor. We are guaranteed already Idaho will have a new governor after, I guess, next Tuesday. That's election day. We are 8 days away. And Melissa, you've been following this very closely, as well as our Morgan Boydston. Tonight, is there a topic that you are just so excited for them to get to?
I am so excited about corrections issues. I mean, it's so...
You are too. Okay, well, we got the answer there.
Right. Both Morgan and I have been covering overcrowded jails on the county level, overcrowded prisons, issues with the judicial system for our own respective stations. That's not something that we really touched on very much in the Idaho Public Television debate, not because of lack of interest, but because of a lack of time. We have the time tonight, and it's such a critical issue. Even if you don't know anyone who's incarcerated, it still affects every Idahoan who pays taxes, because right now it's so overcrowded. The Department of Correction is asking for a $500 million expansion, including a new prison and new beds at existing facilities. That's an expensive, big-ticket item.
And to shine a little bit more light on that, so much of what we've covered so far in terms of the jail overcrowding, well, that county jail overcrowding is happening in big part because of the prison overcrowding at the state level. And so what the Department of Correction is doing is sending prisoners down to the county jails. So county taxpayers, you're footing the bill for that.
Absolutely.
And then on top of that, to build a new prison, you're going to foot the bill for that as well. And so whoever becomes our next governor is going to have to decide, what are they going to do with this $500 million proposal,
Exactly. And especially in a year when there are so many other big asks, including if voters pass Proposition 2, Medicaid expansion, you know, the fifth year of the career ladder. There are so many issues that Idaho needs to deal with. I'm pretty excited about this debate, as you can tell.
Nervous a little bit because it is the last day debate, and because there are so many topics we still have yet to unpack and uncover. And you know, I think for the most part we know where they stand at this point in the campaign, right?
On the big issues, but as we found in every single debate that these candidates have had so far, there's been a little bit of news. Like in the IPTV debate, for example, Paulette Jordan said that if she were hiring and appointing people, she would look out of state for people who were qualified to run, say, the Department of Health and Welfare, the Department of Correction. Once again, it sounds like a wonky thing, but those are the parts of government that affect everyday Idahoans, and they, you know, work with these agencies to figure out how to spend your taxpayer dollars.
Exactly. I want to touch on corrections really briefly because that segues into a nice flow of other topics we're going to be covering tonight that we weren't able to touch on in the IPTV debate, and that is mental health. And so we talk about mental health care. How hand in hand does that go with incarceration rates and recidivism and treatment, community-based treatment, and, you know, helping things on the front end rather than the back end of things? And so all of these things are so intertwined that we're going to be talking about, and oftentimes, you know, the brunt of it goes to the Department of Correction.
And surely, you know, not everyone who struggles with mental health ends up in the prison system, and not everyone who ends up in the justice system has a mental illness. But we hear time and time again from people in the county jails that so many of the inmates really do have underlying issues that they're not prepared to deal with. They're trained in corrections, not mental health treatment.
Right. And instead of, you know, admitting them to inpatient psychiatric care facilities or even outpatient care in order for them to live in the community, oftentimes they are incarcerated.
Joe, we're just going to take over.
Yeah,
I know
I can
live
go.
and talk about correction issues.
This is your thing. These are your two in-depth issues.
You get in on the Facebook.
Yeah, that's right. I'm just here to remind people to vote and to tell you what channel you're watching. You guys do the important stuff. I know we are also standing by for the ceremonial coin toss to decide who will speak first and speak last. That, I believe, is coming up soon. Correct, Mark?
What's that?
When's the coin toss?
It's coming up right now.
All right, so the coin toss is coming up now, so we'll take you to that in a moment, and we'll explain that in a minute. But you both have talked about issues that have been not talked about a lot, issues that we're hoping to get in tonight. But what are issues that have been talked about a lot that you'd still like to hear more? Maybe you don't have a clear answer from the candidate. Maybe you're looking for a better answer from the candidate. I think I can hear some movement behind us, so they might be coming out. So I'll cut you off in a second. But we'll start with you, Melissa. Is there an issue that you haven't gotten a clear answer on yet that you're hoping to get more of tonight?
Yeah, you sure haven't.
I think I've been asking since before the primary election, you know, specifically where the candidates stand and where Brad Little stands on Proposition 2 Medicaid expansion. He's said repeatedly that he will uphold the will of the voters, but he hasn't said what he personally will do. And there are a lot of questions surrounding that, you know, and after that, will he support a work requirement if voters pass Proposition 2? Will he support a repeal of the hospital tax exemption, that sort of thing? So those are specifics that I hope that we get to tonight.
Right. We do have healthcare, you know, fully covered on this debate. I know, Melissa, you're going to be diving into that.
I think D is asking,
as well.
healthcare questions, right?
I think, Medicaid is the biggest talker, right? Because you have this proposition on a ballot at the same time you're electing a brand new governor, and it's pretty unique that they have that opportunity. But something that we talked about behind the scenes of the IPTV debate was okay, so Prop 2 passes and you've got a new governor, then what? Like, they have to have a plan in place now in order to roll this out and to implement these things, right?
If you read the statutory language, the proposed, the statutory language that's on the ballot, and once again, this is a wonky thing, but it matters, the legislature has a very short time to actually have a plan in place to implement full Medicaid expansion. And when you have lawmakers who are going to be fighting over, you know, how to fund it and whether they add a work requirement, that's going to matter. And if the governor doesn't have a plan, if legislative leadership doesn't have a plan, we're going to see a lot of turmoil in the first few weeks of the legislative session in 2019.
But as you've talked about before, other states have done it successfully. maybe not with the new governor, but
well, so successfully, you know, they have implemented it because they've been required to implement it, right? But there have also been some hiccups in other states. You know, in Montana, for example, I don't know whether you'd call this success or a hiccup or whatever, but twice as many people enrolled in Medicaid as they had initially anticipated. So, you know, we keep talking about the 62,000 people who are in the gap and the 98,000 people or so who are expected to enroll in Medicaid if we do expand. But what if the economy crashes? And what if that turns into 150,000 people?
It's a lowball kind of figure, right?
Yeah. Are we ready for that expansion if that happens? Yeah.
We are 11 minutes away from our debate starting at 5:30. It'll be available right here on Facebook Live. It'll be available on KTVB, Channel 7 on your dial, as well as KTVB.com. We'll also be streaming post-debate with our post-game show, as we call it. Melissa, I believe you'll be here with us in Morgan. So this conversation,
unless you kick me out,
this will continue. Maybe I'll scoot over a chair. I think we are standing by for the coin toss. I see Lieutenant Governor Brad Little is standing just off screen talking with our Mark Johnson. I believe we're just waiting for Representative Jordan. Let's take a look at our governor poll on the bottom of the screen. It looks like 57% leading the way. Paulette Jordan in front of Brad Little. Again, this is a non-scientific poll. This is just kind of an interesting
People
poll.
on social media.
It's a straw poll, as we say. If you wanted to be a part of this, you go to ktvb.com/vote, or you can go to the KTVB app and you click on our voting profile.
One thing that I would personally like to ask about, well, I am going to be asking about, but I'd personally like to learn more about, is the doctor shortage and what they plan. I mean, healthcare is, you touched on it, I mean, it's one of the biggest topics in this campaign season in general across the country, but when we talk about the doctor shortage in Idaho, we rank, another statistic, bottom of the barrel when it comes to physicians per capita, psychiatrists per capita, and expenditures per capita. And I think when you look at Idaho, as rural as we are in nature, what incentivizes doctors to want to be in those rural communities? You know, you've got to have rural loan forgiveness programs, or they've got to be like from there, you know, and so Idaho really struggles with that. And you're talking on that mic.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Oh, I'm talking in this mic. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. But
check 1, 2, 3.
Yes,
Hi.
I'm gonna put my FB on.
Yeah, they're going to put their mics and stuff on because we are less than 10 minutes away from the debate. I think you're sitting
real
there.
behind the. Am I sitting here?
I think you're here.
Sides with you.
Okay.
So you're stuck next to me. Sorry, Melissa, but Morgan, she's going to go scoot next to MJ. This is super behind the scenes. This is how we get ready.
This is TV land.
This
everybody.
is TV land.
I can't hear through the IFB very well. Is there a way to turn this up?
I think it's that dial right there.
This not interrupt?
I think that's it.
Okay.
All right, and Tyson's back too to keep the time. That's very important as well. We are just standing by here. We're 9 minutes away. A lot of excitement. I should probably put my cord on as well so they can talk to me. All right, looks like I'm all hooked up as well. So we are just waiting for Representative Jordan, and then we will do the coin toss as our photographer Paul Belke shows you. Our Mark Johnson and Lieutenant Governor Brad Little hanging out there center stage. And this kicks off in about 9 minutes, so we are getting ready. If you missed it earlier, we did kick off the night, part one of our doubleheader, with a debate between Sherri Ybarra, the state superintendent, against Cindy Wilson. They are running against each other for the state superintendent of public instruction, and if you did miss that debate, it will be available on replay on KTVB.com, as well as when this video actually finishes tonight after post-game coverage, it will be posted to Facebook, and you will be able to rewatch this entire broadcast in whole, all 4 or 5 hours. Tonight we're fully interactive, so as you guys have been doing all night long, send us your comments and your questions here on Facebook, and they may just get asked by the candidates. Again, we are standing by here just for the ceremonial coin toss. Representative Jordan is here as well now. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Looks like we're going to do the coin toss now. So Mark Johnson is explaining the rules to both Representative Jordan and Lieutenant Governor Little. So I don't know if that was a joke Mark just told or if that was a real fact. So we'll just.
Thank you. Just like right in the middle.
So Mark will flip it. Looks like.
Sorry, hold on. Hold on. Morgan.
Not sure who's going to call it in the air.
Testing 3, 2. Thank you. My FB is now.
Okay, so first they're going to flip the coin to see who gets to call the coin.
I sure can.
Okay, so after the initial coin toss, to decide who gets to call the coin, it is heads. Paulette Jordan had been previously determined to be heads, so she gets to decide heads or tails, and the winner of the toss will get to choose who speaks first and who speaks second here in the debate. There are advantages to both. Mark sends it in the air, coin will dangle and land. So there we go. So Paulette Jordan will go first. She will speak first, give the first opening statement, and Lieutenant Governor Brad Little will be giving the second and final statement here tonight. So the Lieutenant Governor will get the final word here in our debate. 5:24 local time here. It is 6 minutes till we kick off this debate here on KTVB, KTVB.com, and the KTVB Facebook page. Don't forget to vote during tonight's debate about who you are voting for. We're curious to know who you are voting for. As you can see on our poll below, Paulette Jordan is out in front of the Lieutenant Governor with 1% saying they will vote for other. And again, we encourage you to comment during the entire debate, as well as send us your questions here on Facebook Live. It is a 90-minute debate without commercials, so we have a lot of time to get into topics here tonight, including some of the big things I know that is on our list: education, the economy, as Morgan and Melissa were talking about. They're hoping to get into corrections as well. If you watched the Idaho Public Television debate a few weeks ago, that got very exciting. It was a lot of good back and forth. There's some good debating. So we're standing by. And Melissa, you're still here with us, so they can actually still pick you up there.
Okay, wonderful.
Melissa, what is the biggest difference you were looking for tonight between this debate and Idaho Public Television debate?
I'm hoping for a little bit more specifics on education and healthcare, as well as diving into correction issues.
All right, and Morgan is still...
I'm sorry, I'm fussing.
Morgan's fixing her mic, so we'll let her get ready for the debate. We've got about 5 minutes here. And I see a lot of questions in here as well, and I also know what some of the questions we're going to get through here tonight, so I can let you know. We're going to get through... That is the wrong packet. We've had 2 debates. That was my superintendent packet. I can just tell you some of the questions we are going to get through tonight: healthcare, mental health, the rural doctor shortage, education, public lands, oil and gas leases. We're going to talk about politics and transparency. And then we will also get into some of the propositions here tonight as well. The horse racing, Prop 1. Again, we talked about Medicaid expansion. That will be part of healthcare. And the grocery tax is expected to be a possible question for here tonight. And gun control also in the list of things that could come up here tonight as well. Of course, our Morgan Boydson has extensively been covering growth and infrastructure, so that could be one of those. I'm listening to some things here. Okay, that's some other stuff we could get into here tonight. So I'm seeing a lot of comments starting to pour in. We are watching these very closely here tonight. Myself and a few other people are monitoring Facebook Live. So we encourage you to join us here on KTVB's Facebook page, but you can watch it on Channel 7. You can watch it on KTVB.com. And we also encourage everyone to join in on this poll below, KTVB.com/vote. And you can also find this on the KTVB app. You can go to the vote. So we are standing by here. We have 3 minutes until we kick off the debate. 90 minutes. So this will be heading till 7 o'clock here tonight. And if you do miss any portion of this, if you can't sit through all 90 minutes tonight, this will be available on demand right here on Facebook at the conclusion of the Facebook Live. You'll be able to scroll through not only the governor's debate, but you can also find all of our coverage, starting with the superintendent debate as well. That was a lot of good back and forth between Cindy Wilson and Sherri Ybarra.
Okay.
So we are 2.5 away from the final debate between Idaho's top candidates for Governor Paulette Jordan and Lieutenant Governor Brad Little. Of course, we are 8 days away from the November election here, the general election coming up a little more than a week away. So the debate, again, will be live right here. You don't have to switch anywhere. If you want to be on Facebook, you watch it on your phone, you watch it on your laptop. As we are getting ready to go, everyone's pulling their notes. Everyone looks like they are in place. So we are going to step aside for now. In 2 minutes, though, we are going to be right back here at the Brandt Center at NNU, and then we will kick off our 90-minute debate. A lot of excitement. I see a lot of questions coming in. I'm going to be writing some of these down. I know we had a lot of questions during our superintendent debate that we didn't get to, and I know even with 90 minutes, that is going to fly fast. But again, the big topics, our crews, our teams, our debate teams have been meeting, and they've actually gotten a very good list of questions together. They have a packet of questions and possible topics that they could get to tonight. So we are 1 minute away. We are standing by, so we are going to step aside. We will be right back with our debate coming up in 1 minute.
Legend. 1 minute to show.
Get an extra pen. Try Shannon's. Share.
Can we get a 10 count from you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
And Ms. Jordan?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Got it. Thank you.
Is that a test?
That's a test. And coming out of the Superintendent of Schools debate, you passed.
Okay. Will do.
From the KTVB newsroom, this is a Decision 2018 special. Governor of Idaho, it's the state's top position. Tonight, live from Northwest Nazarene University, the contenders square off on center stage at the Brand Center. Democrat Paulette Jordan is a former Idaho state representative. Her opponent, Republican Brad Little, has served as Idaho's lieutenant governor since 2009. Where do they stand on the issue? Education, healthcare, and growth. It's all on the table tonight. And who will win your vote ahead of the general election Tuesday, November 6th? From the KTVB newsroom in partnership with Northwest Nazarene University, this is the debate for Idaho governor. Live from Nampa, here is tonight's moderator, News Channel 7's Steve Sargent.
Good evening. So glad to have you with us for this very important debate. We're going to spend the next 90 minutes together getting to know these candidates, hopefully in more depth than we ever have before as Election Day looms. We are so glad to have Democratic nominee Paulette Jordan and Republican candidate Lieutenant Governor Brad Little with us tonight. Thank you both for your participation. And they're going to tell you more about themselves in their introductory remarks here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, we always have a goal of giving our candidates equal time, but also allowing for free-flowing discussion. So we're going to be keeping track of the time that you're each taking with your answers so that we can equalize things as we go through the evening. And we'll tell you in a moment how we will help you stay on time and on topic. Our panelists this evening are my journalist friends and KTVB colleagues, Mark Johnson and Morgan Boyston, and Melissa Dowland of Idaho Public Television. Joe Harris is in the studio with us, monitoring what's happening on Facebook as that discussion gets underway. We invite you to be a part of that. And Tyson Miller is our KTVB producer working on timing tonight, and so he'll be giving the candidates some time cues, helping them pace themselves throughout the evening, because we want to be sure that you kind of have an idea, because if we get you going too long on one question, we may not have as much time on another, and we want to hit a lot of topics tonight. I do want to thank Northwest Nazarene University for once again providing the beautiful Brand Center for this evening's debate and for helping us host all of the debates here in Nampa. It's great to have a partnership and cooperation with NEU. And now let's get right to the candidates and their introductions. And we did a template earlier before we went to air. And Ms. Paulette Jordan, the Democratic candidate, received the opportunity to go first.
Thank you. And first off, I'd like to thank KTVB, of course, our panelists, our hosts,
volunteers who joined me on this journey to get us here today. They told me when I first ran that it was too soon for me to run. They told me that I was too young, inexperienced, that I come from rural North Idaho. They also mentioned to me that it was just not our time, but yet you helped us get through the primary, and we've proved to them that we are a better leader. So I want to thank all of you for continuing to stand with us, our campaign, and all the good that we're doing, because we have a bold new plan, a better option for Idaho, which includes ensuring that we bring Idaho into the future, ensuring that we have opportunities for people who are dying without access to health care. This is why we're going to vote on Prop 2. This also means with our bold new plan that we are going to ensure that we cut taxes for Idahoans. We're going to look at working with the current legislative body to even expand not only access to health care, but legalize medicinal marijuana for those who want this as an alternative resource that's going to be both taxed and regulated. While we have 100 points on this plan, I assure Idahoans that we are listening. I've traveled all across the state and met with you over the last 10 months, and every story that I've heard is a heartening story, but one that I've often heard is, I've never had a politician come to my community and listen to my stories, listen to my experience. And here I am, Idaho. Thank you for sharing your stories and your experiences. I hear all of you, and I'm with you, and this is why I'm running for governor. Thank you.
Lieutenant Governor Brad Little.
Well, thank you, Dee and panel. Thank you, KTVB. This weekend, Teresa and I finished our 3,000-mile bus tour with other candidates around the state of Idaho. And we heard loud and clear from one end of the state to the other about the enthusiasm for this election coming out. And I want everybody to participate in this incredible opportunity we have in our democratic republic. As I have traveled Idaho, whether it was as a rancher in agriculture, whether it was in leadership statewide in business, in education, philanthropy, or whether it was I served in the Senate as lieutenant governor, where I went up and down the length of this great state. What I want for my family is what I believe most people all over the state of Idaho want. They want the best possible opportunity to thrive. My experience in all of those fields is what makes me anxious to want to have this opportunity to serve you as your governor. Thank you.
And thank you both. Well, I'm going to start off our conversation tonight talking about something that I can just imagine many Idahoans talking about around their dinner tables as they sit down to dinner this evening, and maybe with their friends as they go to parties and different things. You know, Idahoans really hunkering down now as we get so close to the election, trying to make their decisions on things, for example, Prop 2, you mentioned it in your opening remarks, things that really affect them in terms of health care. We've talked a lot about Prop 2. It leads us into a discussion of the larger issues around health care. And so, Ms. Jordan, I would like to ask you, you've come out strongly in favor of Medicaid expansion, but in the course of discussing health care, you said something intriguing during the campaign. You said you're going to deconstruct and do something nobody else has been willing to do, and that you're talking to Democrats on the national scene about this. And so would you share with us tonight what you're planning to do that has never been done before?
Well, what we do right now is we overspend. We waste taxpayer monies on health care that doesn't work for anyone in this state. And it's fortunate because the problem is we spend more on health care, whereas we could have cut even just in terms of our health care plan for our state employees. We should switch over to a self-funded health care plan instead of our state finance plan, which is costing us over $150 million more. So 20 to 30% more for taxpayers' expense. And this is where I see us shifting back to not only stopping the wasteful spending, but then also getting back to utilizing real data. The National Institute of Health has actually promoted this, where we actually should deconstruct all healthcare plans across the country, especially at the national level. People have said the ACA is not working. Well, let's get to the heart of it. Because as data is constantly progressing and people are sharing and their experiences, their stories, there's more data updating the medicine and the practices of today. Let's get back to what really works. So utilizing that data, utilizing even the top research that's employed at the Pentagon with our current military practices, get to the root problem of these healthcare issues. We have more people in the state of Idaho who are diabetic, who have arthritis, heart conditions, and yet we're not truly treating these conditions, but we're continuing to raise that cost. Under my opponent's plan, their costs are going to be raised from 3 times to 5 times more if he's governor. This is unfortunate because now we have 20 Republican governors who are going to attack pre-existing conditions throughout this country, and I don't want to see Idahoans continue to fall down the wayside and not only have more expensive health care, but just simply not have access to it as we already see now.
tell me more about this self-funded plan. You know, for people that don't really know the ins and outs of how all this works, and they just want to know, okay, how would this affect me, and how is this going to affect spending in the state overall for healthcare? So can you just give me a few more details here?
Absolutely. When I talk about how we're going to inject cost savings into the state, I would tell you as a national business leader that this is one thing that I've always looked at is fiscal savings. We have a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that we're tightening our belt in the best ways possible. And we have a current administration, this little auto administration, that has overtaxed and is wasting money, and to the tune of $250 million a year on 20,000 employees in this government. And it's unfortunate because we are one of 2 states across the country that has not switched over to a self-funded health insurance plan. And because of that, we are overexpending taxpayer resources. Again, this would save us $100+ million, which could go back into great programs that we need for education. Let's invest more in our teachers.
I'll let you respond to that in just a moment, but Lieutenant Governor, if you'll bear with me, I would like to ask you this question first. You've not said how you will vote on Proposition 2, but you do say that you will respect the will of the people. You've been very clear about that. But let me ask you this. You're known as a policy wonk, somebody who does their homework, and you have had the advantage of watching this issue at close range as the legislature has grappled with it to no avail. And some still say that it feels like a lack of transparency that you won't share with us about how you're going to vote on Proposition 2. Can I get you to reveal that with us tonight?
Well, you're correct that I have committed early on that if the people of Idaho select to expand Medicaid, I would implement it. But to implement it, you have to work with the legislature, you have to get an appropriation, you have to work with the federal government. If you look at the language in it, it says the director of the Department of Health and Welfare will do X, Y, and Z. I feel that it's important because there are a lot of different feelings on this issue that I be a neutral party and that I have the opportunity to implement it. I've said I would implement it and I will implement it. It is not my first choice. I would have rather had the dual waiver. I'm concerned about what the cost will be because of the actuarial report that was there. But we absolutely have to take care of these people in the gap. I've been an advocate for it ever since the Affordable Health Care Act passed and we left these people out. We've got them in Medicaid and we've got them in our state exchange, which is one of the best exchanges. And I'm trying to address the bulk of the people of Idaho, which is a much larger percent of the population that have been priced out of health care. But we need to do every one of those things. But I want to be the party that implements that because I have to work with the legislature, I have to work with the appropriators. Just having it pass doesn't mean it'll be implemented unless it's implemented by the legislature, and I've committed to do that.
Would you support a work requirement for Medicaid expansion if it passes?
I would work with the legislature. We've always, in Idaho, ever since we did welfare reform in the early 90s, Idaho's always been a state where we try and put spring in our safety net so that we have a safety net to help people, but we have an opportunity to where they're not stuck in that safety net. That's what I'm committed to do, and I'll work with the legislature and the federal government to get it implemented.
I see you want to jump in.
Well, clearly Mr. Little does not have a plan. I mean, he cannot even answer a simple question, yes or no. The people are looking for leadership at this time, here and now. We cannot waste one more day. In fact, the people have put this initiative forward on the ballot themselves because our current Otter Little administration has done absolutely nothing for affordable and attainable health care in Idaho. This is unconscionable, and yet we have a leadership option right now. We are going to support Prop 2, and once I am governor, within the first 30 days after I am sworn in, I will make sure that we fast-track our rights to opportunity to inject $360 million into our state immediately so that people not only have access to health care, but we make sure that we support those 19 of 27 hospitals that are hanging by a thread in Idaho, and then ensure that we have rural health care that people deserve. Our people are seeking leadership here and now, and they clearly don't see that in my opponent here, but they see that in me.
Mr. Little.
Well, it will take time to implement this. There has to be an appropriation passed. The legislature has to pass an appropriation, and then if you look at the language of the initiative, It says there are things the Department of Health and Welfare has to do. They have to work with the federal government. This is 90% money from the federal government and 10% money from the state. It has to be implemented. I know what it'll take to get it done, but this is not the total solution to health care in Idaho. We have to address the people that have been priced out of health care also. But I've committed over and over, if it passed, I'll implement it. I've got the knowledge, I've got the experience, and I will get it done.
Ms. Jordan, let me ask you this. Other states have seen tens of thousands more enrollees than they initially estimated pre-Medicaid expansion. Montana's been raised as an example, saw more than double the estimate eventually enroll, and the Milliman estimate is based on historically low unemployment in Idaho. Realistically, can Idaho handle this many enrollees, especially if the economy does what economies usually do and takes a dip?
Yeah, first I would like to offer a response to our Lieutenant Governor here, who basically has said that he's going to abandon Idahoans. If you're not going to follow through on their vote, the people's will, once they vote yes on Prop 2, come November 6th, they are telling our leadership that we want this health care. We want to ensure that those 62 to 100,000 Idahoans who are working Idahoans have access to health insurance coverage. These are working Idahoans who deserve this. And then we're going to bring back our resources to our state in the tune of $360 million. This is money that already goes out to other states if we do not opt in. And then if we don't opt in, like our current governor, our lieutenant governor is saying that we are going to do, is then we're going to make this exchange that we are going to pay 40 to 60 or 50-50. Why would we want to pay more when our resources should come back to our state? This is my challenge here, and this is the challenge that every Idahoan faces. We can do better.
Well, let me ask you about doing better and doing it realistically if we end up with more enrollees than the state can afford. What do we do then?
Well, again, because we need to vote on Prop 2 and expand Medicaid to bring our resources back, the whole point is making sure that we have good data to ensure that we have a good plan that works for the future. This is why people are looking at acupuncture, naturopathic therapy, looking at laser light therapy, real solutions that are going to be long-term and sustainable. This is why folks have been asking for alternative medicines. This is why they're going to other states and expending our resources that we would like to keep here in Idaho.
I'd like to move along if we can.
To get it implemented, it is not autopilot. It says right in the language of the initiative that the people of Idaho will be voting on, that the director of the Department of Health and Welfare has to work through this plan, and we have to go to the federal government. As governor, you don't just get to wave a magic wand and have it happen. You have to realize that every dollar appropriated in the state has to be appropriated by the state legislature. I'm the one with the skills. I'm the one with the experience. I'm the one that can build the confidence to get this done and get it implemented in an Idaho fashion. Today, our exchange in Idaho is without a doubt one of the best exchanges because it's an Idaho solution. It's not a federal solution. I want these people addressed, but I want it to be an Idaho solution.
And I want to get us moving along
I would like to respond to that.
Okay, very, very quickly, please.
Primarily because we have someone who is lying to the people. It's unfortunate that we have a lieutenant governor who has served 9 years and has done absolutely nothing for Idaho in terms of quality health care or even attainable health care. And while we have new leadership that's willing to bring bold new ideas and solutions, we are offering a better opportunity, primarily because we're not only going to expand Medicaid and bring our resources back, but that additional money will help us generate a new program. And this new plan is what Idahoans need. And this is what I speak of when we're going to draw all the best and brightest into Idaho to build a plan that even the United States will be able to work from. But this does not take just sitting the sidelines. This means following the proper solution.
Thank you. We need to get moving along to another subject, and you'll be able to work it back into your closing statements if you'd like. But Morgan Boydston, please take the next question.
Yes, and still on the topic of healthcare, but mental health care. Mental health care professionals and Idahoans living with mental illness have said that our system in the state of Idaho is fragmented. According to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, about 48% of Idahoans living with any mental illness received services, while 52% did not. Mental Health America ranked Idaho 47th in the country overall, and that low ranking indicates higher prevalence of mental illness and lower access to care. We talked to some mental health care providers across Idaho about the state of mental health care and what they'd like to see change. So you're going to hear from Dr. Streeter with St. Luke's Children's and his question on air.
How will you support funding so that we can move our state from being among the last in the nation
in terms of per capita expenditure on mental health care, as well as suicide rates.
So kind of a twofold question, but we're going to start with you, Lieutenant Governor Little.
And the question is, how are we going to put more money into mental health? Well, the answer is we're going to continue to grow the government. We're going to continue to grow the programs as we grow the economy. The revenue coming in, just a few short years ago, we did not have crisis centers. Just a few short years ago, we did not have a 24/7 suicide hotline. Just a few short years ago, we did not have mental health facilities. We now know that as we put in these regional crisis centers, which are very successful, we need to add facilities next to them because they're only good for the first 24 hours, and we've got some of these people that go over and over. We're already implementing that up in North Idaho at Coeur d'Alene. We need to implement it all over the state. That's part of the plan on mental health. It's not moving as fast as we want, but generally we're doing it as the economy grows. But if we expand Medicaid, that will be some additional resources in the expansion of Medicaid. And of course, anything we do in the gap will help in that area. But we've got more work to do there. We've also got to do work on substance abuse and opioid. The connectivity between those two issues is part of our problem in corrections, in our justice system. We have to do all of that in a strategic manner going forward to where it works for all Idahoans. Right now, most of the care people get is after they've committed a crime when they go into the drug court or the veterans court, which is a great program, but the problem is they've got to commit a crime when they get in there. We need to do better.
So are you, as a follow-up, are you talking more about implementing more community-based services? Okay.
The state went from a few years ago, the state went from a state-centered, and we realized the vast differences in the communities of Idaho. The fact that what worked in Lewiston didn't work in Rexburg, and that's why we went to community-based mental health. And besides that, we have to do it to take some of the pressure off the mental health holes in our jails.
Okay. Ms. Jordan.
Well, my opponent, Mr. Little, is once again too little too late. When it comes to mental health here in Idaho, I come from a community that is plagued by the lack of services, especially when it comes down to those who are impacted by PTSD and youth suicide rates. I have relatives who have been not only lacked education, but access to health care and psychological services. This is a challenge for many of us in rural Idaho. Being that I know these conditions of what people are going through, even as a mother, I've watched other parents wait 6 months to 4 months, and a total of 10 months just to be assessed, and unfortunately still hit a brick wall. This is a problem here in our state. This is why we are the highest in the country. We are 5th, in fact, in the nation when it comes to youth suicide rates. We also have a growing prison population. That growing prison population is a major issue for us. This is why, as governor, I'm going to ensure that we not only work to bring our people back out of that private prison population system in Texas, but in that private prison contract, and bring our people here to Idaho. And let's reinvest back into rehabilitation programming, crisis centers in rural portions of our state who need it, and then build a partnership with our hospitals so that our people can stay at home, receive the medical attention and care that they need, and then stay productive citizens of our society, and then continue to stick to the traditional values that we care about. If you talk about family values, then walk your talk. Be about those family values, but let's keep our people home. Let's ensure that those resources that they need are going to be there. And this is also why I continue to promote and talk about my first 100-day plan, which is going to be the implementation of a universal pre-K program. Because universal pre-K education as an opt-in program needs to be the foundation of Idaho. We no longer can be the last of everything. We have to start working to be the first of everything.
And I want to follow up with you, and then I would like the Lieutenant Governor to answer this as well. But how do you increase access when we don't even have a sufficient amount of psychiatrists in urban and rural communities? How do you increase that access?
Exactly. We're under the last failed leadership of the last 9 years of the Little Otter administration. We have suffocated our communities. This is why we have to do better. This is why we need new leadership that is going to listen to the people of Idaho. I hear every single Idahoan, and right now they are saying, we need psychological care for our kids. We need behavioral health counselors back into our schools. Let's ensure that our teachers have support for their curriculum and training when it comes to social and emotional development into our curriculum in our schools, in our classrooms. They need this. They're asking for this. And this is how we treat the root problem of our state right now because of the high rising rates of depression and our youth suicide rates. But when it comes to truly succeeding, our people deserve better. They deserve to prosper. But let's make sure we get to the root of it. Let's treat them, and let's make sure that they have access to the education that they rightfully deserve.
But Ms. Jordan, Morgan asked you, and forgive me for jumping in, but the question being, okay, how do you go beyond listening to doing? These are difficult questions and limited resources in Idaho. So we're asking for more specifics here.
Dee, would you be more specific in what you're
Yes,
asking for?
I'm asking for what is the plan for providing the mental health resources in these rural communities, the psychiatrists, the psychologists,
Very
the
simple,
people
Dee.
that we need to get here to do the
So
job.
Dee, let me answer the question. Because you want to be very specific, I hope I'm given the time. One of the issues that I found out was when I met with a local crisis center just a few days ago. I met with them and they said they have a $125,000 budget per annum. $125,000 to treat all of our mental health patients here in Boise. That's not a lot of money. And this year alone, they were withheld those funds from the Millennium Fund that should go out to these crisis centers. They are being not only extracted from our budget, but these folks are not being addressed. We have that Millennium Fund available. It's actually from not
so
only
that is a big part of your plan then to access the Millennium
Well,
Fund.
Dee, you
to
gave
go.
me a few seconds.
Well,
so.
we're running, your
Yes.
time is way over, Lieutenant Governor Little.
But
so
that
I'm
is one
trying to
solution
keep the
because I'm
pacing
pointing
going.
out one very specific issue, which is we have defunded these programs and these crisis centers, which we need to fund again. And we're withholding our current budget money from going to these programs, and they need to be funneled back to our communities.
All right, I do want to give you equal time, Lieutenant Governor. You're running a little behind on that, and so if you'd like to respond to that, and then to Morgan's follow-up as well.
Morgan's question about where do we get the professionals to fill in is a big problem. Several years ago, when Senator Schmidt he carried the appropriation bill for health and welfare, and he talked about the plan that we have for mental health in Idaho. The fact that we have a plan to put in the crisis centers, to go with the regional mental health. But you can't just snap your fingers and have all the professionals here. And it's been exacerbated by the drug problem. A lot of these mental health issues have a direct nexus between the opioid crisis and some of these other crises. We need to get in front of those problems and do whatever we can do to get that overprescription of opioids, to address those problems before they get into the justice system. But Dan Schmidt, I remember, says we have a plan. It's going to take us a while to implement it, and we're going to have the people to do it. That plan's being implemented today. The crisis centers, then the regional mental health, and we're going to have more professionals out there. I wish it was going faster, but there's only so much money you can put into the program if you don't have the personnel to staff it.
I want to follow up with that. You spoke about Medicaid and needing those dollars in order to increase those services. Dr. Strader, the same individual you heard from, says there are over 219,000 children with Medicaid insurance in Idaho. Access to outpatient mental health care is a significant problem for Idaho kids in particular because the reimbursement is so poor for those outpatient providers, so they can't support their practices, right? The overhead to keep their doors open. So would you support increasing reimbursement for Medicaid so more providers are incentivized to accept the insurance and therefore improve access?
Well, some of the Medicaid reimbursement, remember our current Medicaid is 30% state money and 70% federal money is a federal mandate. That's why we have to have an Idaho solution to this. We have to have an Idaho solution just like we did when we implemented our exchange, which, as I said, is one of the best exchanges in the nation. We just don't have enough professionals right now. But Medicaid and Medicare, that reimbursement is mostly determined by the federal government. And I don't question that it's a problem. But it depends upon whether you're in a rural area. Rural area gets a higher reimbursement than an urban area. And that's part of the issue. But I'm for that critical access reimbursement rate at a higher level because that's what we need to do in rural Idaho.
Okay. All right.
Morgan,
Would you like to follow
I would like to respond to that. You know, it's unfortunate because, again, we're being lied to by our current representative here. And while we have a lieutenant governor who is saying to people that this will be a cost savings, this will absolutely not be a cost savings. I've seen your plan, 3 to 5 times more in cost. And while we should be honest about where we're standing on this issue, we would expand Medicaid and save people not only money for resources that we already expend in taxes, but this resource can come back to help such programs. and then draw in more providers. We need more medical providers, more pediatricians, more psychologists. These are people who would help our communities, but we cannot draw them in without the resources and if we do not expand Medicaid.
Okay. And to follow up on that, we're going to switch gears a little bit, similar vein, but about the doctor shortage that Idaho is facing. So also near the bottom of the barrel when it comes to physicians per capita and the number of medical residents per capita. Idaho continues to face a severe physician shortage, particularly in rural areas of the state. Many doctors also are nearing retirement age, which is exacerbating the problem, compounded with our growth. So we'll start with you, Lieutenant Governor Little. How do you plan on addressing the physician shortage?
Well, last year, the state made a big investment in new residences, and I believe there's a plan this year, a continuance. It was the Joint Committee's inclination, and this is the same, kind of the same issue. You just can't snap your fingers and have the doctors in those hospitals to be there to supervise those residences. An investment in a new residency takes time, it takes professionals, and it takes resources. We know that $1 into a residency is the fastest way to get new doctors practicing in Idaho. We have a brand new College of Osteopathic Medicine just down the road here a little ways. It's going to be a while before we start getting that supply out of that school, but we're working on physician's assistants, we're working on nurse practitioners, we're working on all of those things. But you're right, we do have a critical shortage, and the best way to resolve that is to put more money into the residencies like we did last year and like will take place next year if I am governor.
Okay, but the legislature and Governor Otter both didn't fully fund that 10-year plan as was requested by the group that was put together by the State Board of Education. And so they asked for that $5 million a year pumped into it, and the legislature granted $2 million a year. Otter recommended $1 million a year. So is that enough? If you were in his shoes, would you have done the same?
I listened to that debate at the Joint Finance and Appropriation, and I got every indication that this next year they would put more money into it. The question was, what's the timing of those incremental increases in the residency funding? And we are going to have to do that. And you know, we've got more whammy, more witchy seats, but it's still a crisis. And you're right, the biggest issue is the age of our doctors.
All right, Representative Jordan.
Well, we're already wasting resources when it comes down to our taxpayers and their funds. How we ensure that we bring more medical providers to the state of Idaho is, again, we have to expand Medicaid. We have to switch over to a self-funded health insurance plan. We are still one of 2 states that has not done this. There are so many ways that we can save taxpayer resources. And because of all this wasteful spending from the Little Otter administration, we continue to do nothing and stay exactly where we have been for the last 9 years, which is at the bottom.
Dee, am I going to get a chance to respond to this?
Sure.
Thank you. Self-funded. Today, Idaho is about 90% self-funded. The legislature looks at it every year. If we fund it, we're going to have to build a new bureaucracy, and we're going to have more money in the pool. Right now, if you're a state employee, your health insurance is 90% self-funded and 10% reinsured by a carrier. The legislature looks at it every year and says, when we get to a certain point to where we've got enough money to put in it, we will be self-funded. I anticipate, and they came pretty close last year, that will be a decision made by the legislature to be self-funded. But right now, we're 90% self-funded, and we have reinsurance, and we don't have to have all the bureaucracy to meter out the health benefits. Idaho is a relatively conservative state, as it should be. And that's part of the reason is they didn't want to implement a new bureaucracy for our state plan, and we opted to go, and we bid that out. It hasn't been bid out for a while, but right now we're basically 90% self-funded and 10% reinsured by a carrier.
Mark, let's move along to the topic of education.
Thank you, Dee. We're coming off the heels, as you both know, of the state school superintendent debate, which took a very deep and worthy dive into the economics. Thank you. It's the cold medication that's kicking in. The economics of public funding. Thank you. It appears increasing funding for our schools is not moving the needle when it comes to student progress. Student achievement numbers are stagnant, as is the going on rate. 7 years ago, The state deemed a 60% certificate attainment as its most important goal, and in fact backed it up with $133 million into the plan. In 7 years, the trade certificate or degrees that these young Idahoans have achieved has not increased in 7 years. Where do you land on the issue of increased funding for schools versus using the funds in a more creative and possibly impactful way? We'll start with you, Lieutenant Governor.
Well, the goal is that in 2025, 60% of the 24 to 35-year-olds have either a degree or a certificate. I was the author of that resolution, and I told the committee when we did it that this is what we in the ranching industry call a BHOG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. We know it was going to be a tough sell, but you can never get anywhere if you don't have if you don't have a large goal. Part of the issue is I think we need to expand that certificate classification through badging, through what we're doing in career technical. Now, most of it is in the degree. The problem is when you've got 2.7% unemployment, we've got this record economy going around. So many of these kids get out of high school, get a good job offer, and say, why do I want to go to 2 or 4 years? When that's part of the pressure on our go-on rate. We didn't have a go-on rate problem when we had 100,000 people out of work. Now that we've got the fastest growing economy and the fastest growing incomes, a lot of these kids are saying, why do I want to take the chance? We still need that goal. As the economy changes, as the world changes, we need more skilled. I want us to take and focus on the badging process. So if you start out as a welder and you get to be a B and C welder, all of a sudden you've got a certificate and that checks the mark on it. Because those welders, when they get to a certain point, they're going to do what's most important. They're going to live comfortably and be able to comfortably plan for retirement. That's the ultimate goal, is all people in Idaho that they can comfortably plan for retirement. The 60% goal is a benchmark to get there, and we need to continue to work on it. But there's a lot of things. But a lot of that money that was put into education went into a lot of different areas. We have put over $100 million in new money every year into education. And I disagree with your assessment about where we are, but the timer's telling me I got to stop, but I'm going to come back to it later. You can count on it.
Okay. Ms. Jordan.
Thank you, Mark. As a business leader at the national level, I've definitely learned that when you invest, you can then expect dividends. We have not invested in Idaho's education. And in fact, so much so that we have many educational goals that have gone unmet. We are failing when it comes to our teachers. We are failing when it comes to our students. And how I mean that is because 10% of our teachers are leaving Idaho every year. Our current representative here has said to me that in the last few debates that we have increased the rate of pay for these teachers. But how can you say that we're doing any better when we're still last in the country when it comes to teacher pay? How can you be proud of yourself when you have divested in education and we are still at less than 40% or 40th, 47th, 49th, 50th, and 51st when it comes in rankings in this country when it comes to education? The fact that we have divested so much so in education has failed our future. We can no longer live with this type of leadership that leaves out our children. This is where I'm going to start talking about why we must invest in education, why we must invest in K through 12. Begin by sorting through advancing our kids through STEM, making sure that we are keeping up with the advancements of technology, artificial intelligence, making sure our kids are not going to be replaced by the jobs of the future. We have to also look at their core curriculum development, social emotional curriculum that is going to be one of the reasons why we get our kids out of this other percentage that we see, which is our suicide rates. This is why I'm also going to invest and build in with our current legislative body this universal pre-K program that is going to be an opt-in system that will help many Idahoans have access to early education regardless of the income they make. We have so many needs, but the go-on rate has dropped. Our dropout rate has staggeringly gone up, and it's unfortunate because we have leadership at the current administration, this little otter administration, that continues to do nothing. And while they're standing proud on these failing numbers, having unmet goals, how can they tolerate them just continuing to run for office? Why do we want more of the same? Why would we want to continue to fail Idaho?
Lieutenant Governor, you want to contest those statistics?
I do. Those low rankings, those low numbers are on inputs. How much money does the state spend? What's the attainment level of the parents? How many languages are spoken in the home? There's a whole bunch. Do we mandate pre-K education? In Idaho, the NAEP, which is kind of the gold standard by all the education leaders, our scores in the middle school, where we're making the progress, are above the national average in both of those, in both reading and in both math. If you're a student and you take the ACT test in Idaho, your average score is better than all the surrounding states around the state of Idaho. We've got a lot of work to do. We have increased teacher pay by 32% in the last 4 years. The percent of increase in teacher pay, and we had a long ways to go. I'm an advocate for increasing it. But the fact that we're making this great progress is probably the reason the 9,000 teachers in Idaho endorsed my campaign.
Well, first of all, my opponent is continuing to mislead the public when he's saying that we are having a higher success rate on the ACT scoring. The state of Idaho does not fund the ACT scoring. We fund SAT. More students take the SAT. And while he's continuing to mislead and talk about this endorsement, this is a Republican organization that funds Republican candidates in the state of Idaho. So superintendents, I didn't know superintendents speak for teachers.
That's the Idaho Education Association.
Right,
they represent the teachers.
But we're talking about teachers of Idaho. The teachers of Idaho are part of this campaign, sir. Let's be realistic. And one other thing, you're talking about how we have a record economy. How is it that we have a record economy when we are 50th when it comes down to a livable wage? Let's not continue to mislead Idahoans. They need the truth.
We would be remiss, and I want to move on, Dee, if it's okay, but we would be remiss if we didn't allow you, Ms. Jordan, to weigh in, follow up on a moment that we had in the previous debate. When asked who she would vote for governor, Dee asked the question of Democratic candidate for school superintendent Cindy Wilson. She said she was, quote, undecided. Have you engaged with someone who is running to become one of the state's highest elected officials? Why wouldn't she, as a member of your party, have made her decision by now? Do you know?
I think it's fair for anyone to be neutral on their position because we don't know the shakeup. And I want every candidate to know that when they're elected, that whoever it is, that they have to work with that candidate. That is good leadership.
Okay. May I move on?
Yes, let's go to public lands.
As you both know, 2/3 of Idaho is federally owned land. Last week, GOP congressional nominee Russ Fulcher said, quote, Idahoans are tenants of the land in our state and should be the landlords. Others say taking over management would open the door to oil and timber industries and an understaffed fire management program. Do you support the transfer of these lands to state or private hands? Ms. Jordan.
As someone who was born and raised here in Idaho, my heritage has stemmed here for thousands of years. It is upon me to ensure that we defend and protect every single acre of public land, and on top of that, ensure that these public access roads stay public for those of us who like to hunt and fish. When I'm governor, we will no longer sell more of Idaho's lands as is currently being done right now. The current Little Otter administration continuing to sell off Idaho's land or lease Idaho's lands for more hydraulic fracking does no Idahoan any good. Once I'm governor, I will defend Idaho and our future because they have a right to inherit every single acre of Idaho's land.
But what about taking over management of the federally owned lands?
And when it comes to federally owned land, that land needs to stay in public hands. We have to better our relationship and become responsible stewards at the local level, ensuring that we have a solid plan that will not only enhance local leadership, but also residents to be educated on how to properly manage the local communities.
A lot to unpack there.
Well, the answer to your question is no. I would not advocate for selling those lands. But today, Idaho, in the western states, leads the nation in what we're doing in the Good Neighbor Authority. If you're tired of the smoke in the summers in Idaho, what you need to do is support the Good Neighbor Authority, because the state of Idaho is going out and going to these multiple use lands where the timber has not been managed, where we've got dead and dying timber, and the state of Idaho is taking the lead to do forest health harvesting there, which will help watershed, wildlife habitat, local communities. It's a win-win for everybody, and it's really a win if you want to control some of these fires. But that's federal land where there's an agreement between all the parties involved to have better management. Idaho leads the nation in that program today.
Mark, I'd like to follow up on that. Yes. Because while the Good Neighbor Authority Agreement is on my platform, we have to do better than that. We have to get back to local control. We have to ensure that local leaders are invested into their residences, because we have gone far too often for too many years without funding our current fire management department. We have no real support. There are volunteers. So the fact that we have volunteers at the state level working with the Bureau of Land Management is unfortunate, because we have a lot of timber in the state to protect. So we have to have a better agreement. We have to have real leadership that's going to make sure that this happens. But again, because we have a current administration that has sat on this for 9 years and has done absolutely nothing, we are unfortunately failing Idaho citizens, and we're still stuck in this place, just continuing to kick the can down the road.
I don't know which fire you were on where the people in the yellow shirts were volunteers.
Many fires.
The last time I saw, they were either employees of the BLM, employees of the state of Idaho, employees of the Forest Service, or they were part of the RFPA where they selected to be volunteers, or they were a local fire department, or they were the professional firefighters of Idaho in some instances, who, by the way, are supporting my campaign. But those volunteers are part of the RFPA. Again, Idaho leads the nation in the implementation of a program where the farmers and ranchers that are close do initial attack, and then the professionals come in.
Leads the nation how?
What's that?
You said leads the nation, but leads the nation how?
No other state has implemented a program where the farmers and ranchers are the initial attack. There was a little program in Nevada and a little program in Oregon. Today we have 8 RFPAs in Idaho, and part of the reason we didn't have as many range fires this summer as we've had before is because those ranchers and those farmers, including my family, some of them sitting right out here, were the first ones out to put those fires out.
That is not the same thing that I hear. We're talking about fire management, and what I hear from Bureau of Land Management is that we need to continue to fund, but we need to fund a state program under our watch, which means instead of allowing them to go under unemployment, let's continue to fund them year-round, and then deploy a plan that they can operate at the local level. We are not doing that currently.
So you want the state to pay the BLM firefighters?
No, we need to pay our own people for the work that they do.
All right, let's bring Melissa Davlin from Idaho Public Television into the conversation. And Melissa, I know you have several things you want to get covered, so take it away.
Absolutely. Good evening, Lieutenant Governor Little. Just today, your opponent sent out a press release accusing you of conflicts of interest when it comes to the environment because of past leases that you and your family had with Snake River Oil and Gas for fracking on the private land that you own. Fracking, of course, has been a controversial practice in other parts of the United States and in Canada as it uses huge amounts of water. Is this a responsible use of the land, and is that a fair criticism from your opponent?
Melissa, I don't know where you got that, because there's been no fracking in Idaho, and we were one of 700 different individuals in 3 or 4 counties where there were exploration leases. They were looking to see if there were any oil and gas resources there. That took place. We don't have any of them now, but they took a big swath to want to see what kind of mineral activity there was there. But in Idaho, because of our geology, we don't frack in Idaho. If you go to where there's the small amount of oil and gas industry that exists over in Payette County, there's no big armada of water trucks going up and down the road like there are in these areas where they do fracking. We don't frack in Idaho. And if we did, I'd be very concerned, because something that's way more important to me than oil and gas is what we do to water. My neighbors, my family, we're all dependent on good, clean water, and that's the most important thing in Idaho.
Representative Jordan, that came directly from the press release that you sent out earlier today. Would you like to respond to Lieutenant Governor Little?
Yes, clearly he's not paying attention to his fellow residents or fellow Idahoans. Our current representative here, my opponent, has once said this before, that it was better for us to open up and expand for hydraulic fracking as a greater resource for this state. Many of your neighbors, in fact, are ones who are in opposition to you in this regard.
Nobody has ever fracked in Idaho.
My opponent actually worked towards releasing 4,000 acres of land to lease to the natural gas company Alta Mesa for drilling.
Would you like to respond to that?
Yes. I mean, but we don't frack in Idaho. I, just like lots and lots of neighbors, they came in and says, let's see what's here. They lease the ground to do exploration. There's no drilling. There's no, it's in a very small area. They looked at a great big area, and the oil and gas industry in Idaho is in a very small area right now.
But you were open to exploration on your land.
Yes.
Are you comfortable with that being a responsible use of the land?
As long as the oil and gas development is good for the environment, as long as we're not doing anything to jeopardize our water system. That's the most important thing to me.
Representative Jordan, in his 2014 State of the Union, President Obama himself said that fracking and natural gas can be a bridge to a cleaner fuel future. Why shouldn't Lieutenant Governor Little be open to having these leases on his private land? And do you disagree with President Obama?
Well, Mr. Little is fine if he wants to do that on his own land, while I 100% disagree. But this also presents an issue for many of his neighbors, many whom are going to be connected because their land is locked together. On top of that, the resource underneath, which is most detrimental if we decide to pollute it altogether, which is our water. Water is our greatest natural resource. Let's protect it. This is why I am absolutely against any hydraulic fracking of any kind. And the fact that our current Lieutenant Governor here is saying that this is not an issue, or that he is not a part of bringing hydraulic fracking to the state of Idaho, this is an issue for us. I implore Idahoans to fully look into this issue themselves and see the truth for themselves.
Well, you'll be successful in stopping fracking because there is no fracking.
All right, thank you.
Okay, on to you, Morgan.
All right. This is for Representative Jordan. I and other reporters across the state have questioned you about your campaign staff shakeups, ties to a federal super PAC, and spending with vague companies in Wyoming registered to the same mail forwarding address, and multiple companies registered to the same address in California. When questioned by journalists, you've said multiple times, we have a bias against you. I was once told you were out of town when in fact you were not, and when I showed up at your radio interview, you publicly said I was a, quote, uninvited guest. As recently as Friday on your Facebook Live feed, you said, quote, we don't have a lot of local media on our side. A lot of them are Republican owned, so their media will go toward who they think are paying attention, went on to say, so they're not running in our favor. Why do you feel some local media is attacking you or has a bias against you? And if you became governor, could Idahoans trust that you'd be accessible to the media?
Well, first, I've always defended the dignity of the press, and I will always continue to do that. And I actually value not only freedom of speech, but freedom of the press. I always implore that people understand that everyone has to do their own research. This is why I think it's important for us to ensure that we invest in education, invest in critical thinking, because I want people to think independently for themselves. In this particular case, here in Idaho, you're going to come through all the firsts, which is remarkable because I'm experiencing a lot in this campaign. I've also experienced while we're challenged because someone may not get along with the team, and then it becomes overhyped, and that's an issue. But yet this is also the growing pains of a campaign that has become very large in terms of our grassroots movement. It's very exciting for a lot of people. We've had thousands of people not only volunteering, but wanting to be a part of the core development of where we're going because they see that our message is a better message and they want to be a part of that. And while that's great, I want to see the media support that more so rather than going after individuals and trying to pick them apart. I don't think that that's necessary here in Idaho because we're already divided politically. Let's come together. Let's unify our Idaho for the better good.
Okay, but to answer my question, would you make yourself accessible to the
Oh,
media
absolutely.
if they scrutinize
Yes.
you or
Oh, and I have.
hold you accountable?
Yes. So Morgan, again, because we invite everybody to come through our office and we always make sure that we respond to everyone. I cannot speak to the day that you mentioned that I was gone, but I am everywhere. So every given day, at any given moment, our schedule shifts. When you came by, it was not mentioned to me that you were going to be there, which is why we were wondering what was going on because it was mentioned to my staff earlier that he had dropped in unplanned. This is why we have a press team, a communications team. We would like people to go through the channels just so we can stay coordinated and organized in our schedule. That's just a matter of respect and professionalism. But again, we always have open doors. Everyone and anyone is allowed to come through at any point in time because at this point, we have a week left. We just tell people we're here and we will drop our schedule to ensure that we make sure that the people understand where we're going and that we are completely transparent at every single step of the way.
Okay, and you have a film crew following you, and I was told by your campaign manager that the lead filmmaker is paid with campaign contributions. What is the purpose of having this documentary created about you, and why should Idahoans be paying for it?
Idahoans are not paying for the documentary. That's actually very separate, and it's funded by another organization. What the person who is filming is basically we're paid to do is gather film to collect for our commercials.
Okay, and she's paid with campaign contributions.
Yes, one of the documentarians who's not part of the other film, that's the actual documentary that they're calling Paulette, that will come up next year, but the person who's part of the process of creating those commercials is paid by the campaign.
Okay, so the documentary about you and then the filmmaker are separate. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'd like to move on with a question directed to Lieutenant Governor Brad Little.
Lieutenant Governor Little, you have a number of contributions from Idahoans that are in small dollar amounts, but you also have a lot of contributions from PACs, political action committees, and also people with corporate interests, including $5,000 from Monsanto, $5,000 from Simplot, $1,000 from Allstate Insurance, $1,000 from pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly. The list goes on. How do we know if you get elected and you're considering legislation, that you will represent the interests of everyday Idahoans as opposed to the corporations and the PACs who have helped fund your campaign?
Well, I think my record, whether it was in the Senate or as Lieutenant Governor, bears that out. I have one constituent, and that's how do we create the best possible opportunities for us, for our kids and our grandkids to thrive here. And I believe that those contributions are because they know what they get with Brad Little. They know what I've done in education. They know what I've done in business. They know what I've done in economic development. They know what I've done on tax policy. It's the certainty of good governance is part of the reason that they're participating along with 7,500 other donors to our campaign.
You've brought up multiple times in your campaign rising insurance premiums, but you have a number of contributions from insurance companies who, quite frankly, benefit from those rising healthcare costs. So again, how do we know that you were listening to everyday Idahoans who are struggling to pay for healthcare?
I'm trying to get the cost of premiums down. If the White House and CMS will implement our plan, it'll bring it down 30 to 60%. But you know what? We need more people in the pool. We have lost the young and the healthy. Insurance doesn't work if it's just people that are big utilizers. We need to get everybody in the pool, and I assume that's for their benefit. But I'm dedicated to getting affordable, accessible health care to all Idahoans, and they must consider that to be to their benefit.
And when it comes to businesses like Monsanto and Simplot, who quite frankly benefit from loosened environmental regulations, how much do those contributions play into you working with the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality or with these regulators?
It will have no impact. I believe the reason that they're interested in my campaign is the fact that economic growth in Idaho is faster than anywhere in the nation, and it's creating opportunities for them, for their companies, and most importantly, for their employees.
Thank you. All right, thank you.
Oh, Melissa, can I follow up to that question?
Yes, of course.
Well, while the current Otto Little administration has created this corporatocracy in the state of Idaho, much like the rest of our country, it is continuing to be a plague of our society when it comes down to how much you give to these corporations, including the health insurance companies. Now, I would implore that the people of Idaho maintain invested in this issue, because while you look at how many corporate PACs have bought into this campaign, my opponent's campaign, it becomes an issue, because this, again, goes back to Citizens United, how we have to end this corporate corruption, buying candidates, paying to play. The people of Idaho cannot afford this. The people of Idaho, however, are continuing to invest in this campaign, dollar for dollar, over 20,000 contributions, because we are running a campaign of transparency and ethics, unlike my opposition.
Well, from a percentage standpoint, and I can't remember which one of the professionals in the media pointed this out, your contributions from tribes who are obviously interested in Indian gaming on a percentage basis is more than it was into mine.
Absolutely
they weren't PACs, but they were still special interests.
They're not special interests either. Tribes are called sovereign nations.
Oh, they're sovereign nations.
They are also individuals, human beings.
Melissa, I'd like to give you another question if you'd like to move along to prison overcrowding.
Yeah, absolutely. And Representative Jordan, I'll start with you. According to the Justice Reinvestment Initiative Impact Report from 2018, Idaho's prison population is at an all-time high. Both the state of Idaho and individual county jails are struggling with overcrowding. And the Department of Correction, as you noted earlier, is sending hundreds of inmates to Texas and has requested a new prison and new beds at existing facilities to the tune of $500 million. Do you support this request, and how high a priority would it be for your administration? And does Idaho have the money for it?
First, we're not going to invest $500 million into a prison system. We're going to invest that back into our communities. This is why we must speak of rehabilitative care, the decriminalization of cannabis to keep our people who are often held in prison because of drug crimes, drug abuses. Those folks within, I think it's roughly now 50% to 2/3 of our prison population that are there because of these low-level crimes, drug offenses. These folks are asking for our help. This is a cry out to our communities to say, we need this rehabilitative care. We need this care at the local level. Let's keep our families together. Let's ensure that we not only invest in our people at home, but get back to the root cause, which is education, early intervention, preventative care. This is why we have to get back to universal pre-K and truly invest in our K through 12, rather than continuing to divest.
But of course, those are long-term solutions that we'll see benefits for especially if we're talking pre-K, 15, 20 years. Counties are dealing with overpopulation and overcrowding in their jails right now, and families that we talk to on Idaho Public Television are really concerned about these inmates who are being sent to Texas. So what will you do right now to deal with overcrowding?
I'm going to bring our people back into our state, because while we have seen this overpopulation in our prison system, we have to get to the root problem. But this is why we have to ensure we look at these cases case by case, because there are people in the prison system for drug crimes, drug offenses. This is why it's an issue, and this is why I'm working to decriminalize cannabis here in Idaho. And this will be a major issue for many families, and they know that this is why we have to decriminalize cannabis. We'll not only save our state $23 million, but this is an issue where we can actually keep our people home.
Again, that's a long-term solution. Short-term, where do you put the inmates?
Well, this is also why I look at building this partnership with our rehabilitation crisis centers in our hospitals. I'd rather keep our people in our hospital beds and expand at the local level. Also another reason why we have to expand Medicaid, because that resource will come back to our rural communities, ensure that we hang on to those 19 of the 27 that are hanging by a thread, and then we can expand in not only our rural health care, but our rural hospitals that need that support.
Lieutenant Governor Little, same question to you. Do you support the Department of Correction request, and what do you do about overcrowding?
Well, first we have to keep people safe, and unfortunately, and a lot of it is because of the drug problems. But these are not first-time offenders. I've seen the notebook of everybody in our correction system, and multiple offenders, drug trafficking, multiple parole violations. There are very few, if any, first-time minor drug offenders in our correction system. But we do have to get in front of this, and that's why we need to implement a plan to where before people get into the justice system, before they go to drug court, we've got a place for a family member, a teacher, a friend, a faith-based leader to get these people into a program before they get up to an addictive level to where crime becomes a big part. And sometimes it's often property crime, and sometimes it's violent crime. But we have to keep the people of Idaho safe, and these people that are repeat offenders, they have to go somewhere. We can bend that curve down. I think you covered the interim committee on justice reinvestment, and they had almost a consensus on some changes we need to do in our sentencing law. But as you alluded to, this is something you just don't snap your fingers. We've got to keep our people safe in the interim and work through this a step at a time.
So you've alluded to long-term changes just like your opponent, but about that $500 million request, do you support it? And if not, where do we put the inmates?
Well, obviously, right now we're purchasing beds out of state, and that should be, and it is a last resort. There's a proposal for another work release facility. I toured it down in St. Anthony when I was down there last time or time before last. There's some little piecemeal projects, but the big one that's out there is the big facility, which will also take care of some of the rehab problems we've got. This is a partnership between the Board of Corrections, the governor, and the legislature to figure out what the solution is. We were kind of tight on beds before, but this opioid crisis, which every state's having, exploded it, and that's part of the problem with the bed space. There's a crisis in bed space all over the United States as a result of this opioid crisis.
Well, and you're absolutely right that about 3 out of 4 admissions into Idaho prisons are repeat offenders. So you've talked about the front end, but what about those sentencing changes that would prevent that recidivism and help reduce that population?
Well, we've got some pretty good programs in the Department of Corrections. We just don't have enough of them. And I think the decision unit they talked about at the interim committee, and I talked to Chairman Lodge yesterday, is for 30 new parole officers. When we did justice reinvestment, we didn't do one thing, and that's a reinvestment. We changed what we were doing at one place, but we didn't invest in those parole officers. And having those managed parole officers, how you keep those people in those programs to break that cycle of recidivism.
And your opponent has mentioned decriminalizing marijuana. You have spoken against
the solution to our corrections problem is not decriminalization of marijuana, because you can go to the other states and see that it hasn't worked there where they've decriminalized. Go on the streets in Portland, go on the streets of Seattle, go on the streets in California, go on the streets in Denver. You decide whether you want Idaho to look like that.
Well, I mean, it's clear where he stands. He's opposed, which is fine. He's of the past. We are moving into the future. And in this regard, when you talk about another option, because we are already saying we're not going to invest that $500 million into a new prison system or expanded prison system, what I would like to do is basically support our current body, which you met Representative Ilana Rebel, and she actually presented a great opportunity, and one that even Supreme Court justices or justices here in the state of Idaho had talked affirmatively on, which is to say that let's reduce minimum mandatory sentencing. We have to get back to reforming Idaho state code and our laws to be better for the citizens of Idaho.
Yeah, that was one of the recommendations.
Something you agree on.
Yeah, there we go.
All right.
We're on a roll.
I was just going to make note of that myself.
Well, it takes leadership to make it happen.
All right, let's move along to Mark.
I would like to say, though, too, that it was recommended a few years back, and unfortunately we have done nothing about it. So,
the big topics we're talking about tonight, healthcare, education, prison overcrowding, are all exacerbated by growth. I can't say economics, but I can say exacerbated. Idaho is one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing state in the nation. We jumped 2.5% in the last year. Was our state prepared for this crush? And how prepared are we going forward in terms of the rainy day fund and our preparedness in the event of an economic downturn like the one we saw in 2007 and 2008? What are the assurances that you're giving regular Idahoans on the street that we're prepared for this influx of growth economically for them right now? Lieutenant Governor.
Me?
Yeah.
Well, you asked about the rainy day fund. We have just reached the level we had in 2006 before we had the last recession. And that was a lifesaver to us. We'd have had to make substantial cuts in education, bigger cuts, if we wouldn't have had that rainy day fund. And the legislature and the governor did the right thing. They metered it out over 3 years. We're back to about $500 million in that fund. We've got one of the most solvent budgets in the nation. We've got our income tax rate lower than it's been any year since 1934. We have got the oxygen in the room for the economy to continue to grow. But global things happen, national things happen, commodities happen. We have to be prepared. And the best way to be prepared is have your bills paid, be solvent, be growing, invest in education, do the right things, and then you're prepared. I prefer this problem to what we had when we had 100,000 people in Idaho out of work. This is a way better problem. A lot of these growth issues need to be addressed by local government, and the state's a partner in that. I would tell you that in this valley right here, the most expensive road we have is the road between Caldwell and Boise. But you know what's taken place? Commercial development, industrial development has taken place at Caldwell, so that the traffic turns around, where the affordable housing in Notice, Parma, Wilder, Middleton, in Caldwell is available for that growth. The magic of the free economy is solving part of that problem. We still have to invest more money in our roads and bridges, but to a certain extent, one of the things that's going to happen is these rural communities, if we give them better broadband connectivity and better roads, some of these jobs that would normally go to the urban areas are going to go out to those rural areas, and that's going to be a great thing because it's going to help healthcare, schools, critical services, and we see that in some rural areas, but that's one of my passions, is to get that growth out of these urban areas and start diverting it out to these rural areas that need it more.
But how do you do that, Lieutenant Governor? That's been talked about in the last decade.
Well, it's taken place. It is taking place. There's new advanced manufacturing. We lead the nation in the growth in the aerospace industry, in little companies providing parts and pieces for the aerospace. We lead the nation in the recreational areas, munitions, and gun manufacturing, sporting goods. And a lot of that has taken place in rural Idaho, and those are great supplements, because those kids in those areas that used to work in mills, mines, and farms are just the workforce they need in those new industries, and the state needs to facilitate more of that going forward.
Really didn't hear a clear answer on this issue, but I will tell you what I've seen is that being from rural Idaho, we are nearly one bridge failure away from being cut off from the rest of Idaho. And one of the challenges that I see right now is the shell game within the bureaucracy that is created by the Otter Little administration. And the shell game is basically stating to me that we have $100 million really just laying around on this table, whereas we have a $400 million deficit when it comes to transportation maintenance. And then we have another $1 billion in Garvey bonds debt service that's already at play here in our state. And yet while we continue to kick the can down the road when it comes to maintaining our roads and bridges, our current administration has not had foresight or a vision to see our current population growth. And now that it's an issue, this is an issue that I will inherit. And once I'm governor, I will show the people what leadership looks like. We're going to insert the resources that we need back to our rural communities. But we're going to do so by reasserting local control. While we preempted it through the current administration, we will make sure that local control happens. We will make sure that we support our mayors, county commissioners, road commissioners, city council, and if they want to opt into local option tax, let's let them. Let's make sure they have the resources at the state level and then have those resources at the local level, because every county is different. And while I've met with all 44 counties, while everyone has a different plan, let's let them roll out those plans for the better needs of their community.
Respond to the kicking the can down the road?
Well, we have today part of the surplus, a quarter of the surplus, every dollar goes, part of it into the local roads and bridges and part of it to the state. We increased funding 4-5 years ago now to address part of that problem. We have more work to do. I've been, all my career, I've been an advocate for putting more money in. It's hard to raise taxes in Idaho. I'm glad it's hard to raise taxes in Idaho. We have to justify to the people of Idaho that we've done everything possible to have the most efficient transportation system to where cities, counties, highway districts, and state are all pulling in the same direction, that we're not wasting resources. And then we have to ask them for more money. We have to justify it. But it is hard to raise money for roads in Idaho. You need to remember that Idaho has twice as many miles of road per person as Washington, Oregon, and Utah, and Montana and Wyoming fund their roads with carbon taxes, with revenue off of oil and gas. We've got a little bitty oil and gas industry in Idaho, and that's why funding roads in Idaho is always a challenge, and it always will be.
Morgan, I know you've worked on this issue.
You pretty much answered what I wanted to ask my next
Good.
question, but
Next one.
well, I've got another,
Oh.
but leading into that, you say it's difficult to raise taxes. So would you support then increasing the fuel tax? Would you support increasing those vehicle registration fees? And as Ms. Jordan mentioned, would you support a local option tax in order to fund transportation? Because we are so behind, similar to the prison overcrowding system. You drive anywhere, especially in the Treasure Valley, and it's becoming a nightmare in so many major highways. What do you do right now? If you were to become governor, how would you increase that bucket?
Well, the raising revenue is the governor advocates, the governor either signs or vetoes, and the governor promotes, but the legislature has to pass that. I think I'm the person to get that done. I've been advocating for transportation investment my entire career. Those legislators, the men and women in the Idaho legislature, the people that run the highway districts, the cities and the counties, know my position on getting more money for roads and bridges. We always have to continue to make sure that we're efficient, that those federal dollars that we're getting in, that they're efficient. Federal government, when we get a dollar from the federal government, there's about 30% more in costs. And we're trying to segregate some of those funds to where they're more effective. But at the end of the road, when we look at all the bridges we've got to put more money in it. I've been an advocate for it. I was an advocate primary, and I'm an advocate today.
Okay, I understand that you support it, but how are we going to do it if you know the legislature might be opposed to raising taxes? I mean, how do you do it?
Well, you have to convince them. You have to work with those legislators. You have to say, you know, we've got multiple problems. You know, for a long time, part of the pushback on it was the fact that when we did the Garvey bonding, a lot of the Garvey bonding was spent about 2 miles from where we're sitting right now. And so the legislators from the rest of the state said, why should we do that? Now, there was a lot put into Highway 95 and some other areas, but that was a critical commerce thread that was basically proposed under Governor Kempthorne when he was there. But we've got to go the next step. We have got to go the next step to pay for the maintenance of the bridges. In fact, the bridges were supposed to last 60 years. We're going to have to last about 110 years. We've moved that down to about 90 years in some of the prudent investments we've made to try and get that bridge work done. And that's critical for mainly safety, but also for commerce.
Okay, and Representative Jordan, how do you increase that bucket for transportation?
Well, first, I believe in state sovereignty, and I love local control. This is why I value it so much so that under my term, I will make sure that we represent Idaho via local leadership. And while we're governor, one of the issues that I've talked about throughout this campaign, which is essentially financial independence. Financial independence comes by means of this opportunity that we have, like many states across the country are looking into, which is building their own state bank, much like North Dakota. They've been doing this for the last 90 years. And because of that, creating our own financial independence, we're going to get away from Wall Street and get away from our strong lean on the federal government. We have to start looking towards investing back into Idaho. Idaho first. And while we have our own state financial independence plan in place, and this will take some years, but when we have it in place within the first year, it's stated in some other plans and comprehensive plans that they've developed, $150 million is invested back into our state. I've looked at multiple items in our budgets here in the current Otter Little administration, and one of those line items I've seen was $150,000 that we pay in credit card fees. Now imagine if our credit card transactions were invested back into this local bank instead of another corporate bank, out-of-state bank, and instead into our own coffers. Idahoans deserve better, but this comes by means of real leadership. And when we start investing in Idaho, we will have more money to pay for these roads and bridges that we need to.
So is that the alternative then to raising vehicle registration fees and the fuel tax?
Well, exactly, because we want to start investing back into Idaho. This is a long-term, short-term solution, but at the same time, local control, when they want to, say, raise more money for a local road or bridge, they can do that at the local level. But we should have those resources here in the state fund, and this will come by means of not only expanding Medicaid to have more resources so that we can invest in other areas, but we also need to end this private prison contract and save $55 million. Let's decriminalize cannabis and save us $23 million or more, and that's a conservative number. And let's look at the money that we expend already in terms of the billions of dollars that we pay into the lower Four Snake River dams. We have to look towards our future. Let's look towards tourism, advancing tourism, which is a $6.4 billion industry. Let's look at expanding our economy via ag and alternative resources. Let's also look to become the nation's energy leader when it comes to all of our state that we already provide. We have de-incentivized solar. This would not only bring in more jobs, but an additional resource. In terms of the INL and our relationship, we need to strengthen that relationship to ensure that those resources and everything else, when it comes down to decarbonizing Idaho in an energy plan, all of that is put to play here in Idaho in our new administration so that we can not only optimize and grow our economy, but ensure that we are protecting our ecosystem, which is all connected. Education, ecosystem, economy, you have to strengthen all three for us to truly grow our resources.
Lieutenant Governor Little, would you like to respond to any of those things, any of the ideas she just raised?
Well, I haven't figured out how taking out the dams and legalizing marijuana is going to pay for roads, but that's...
We're talking about bringing additional resources and not wasting taxpayer money.
All right. Joe, I want to ask you, you're watching on social media, and I know there are several issues that have been resonating and some that people still would like to see some answers to. Can you fill us in? It looks like you've got a microphone on there.
I do. Well, a popular comment today has been about marijuana. You guys both touched on it briefly, so we'll move on from that one. Another thing that has come up is both propositions. Proposition 2, which we touched on, and Proposition 1. Lieutenant Governor Little, we'll start with you. How are you voting on Proposition 1?
I've told everyone I support Prop 1.
And why is that?
Because of what the racing industry does to rural Idaho. Rigby, Jerome, Blackfoot, Emmett, Malad, those youth programs, the 4-H, the rodeo, they all have a chemistry with the horse racing industry that there. The proposal to increase revenue through instant gaming to get the gate up to where there's bigger purses is what's going to keep the horse racing industry thriving in Idaho.
Ms. Jordan, how will you be voting on Proposition 1?
Well, I've made it very clear time and time again that I'm voting against while I support the will of the people. But let's be mindful here. I know what this, my opponent here is about expanding gambling in the state of Idaho. But let's be realistic, because like the Republican mantra is already, let's let the free market operate as a free market. Why are we going to support and prop up a dying industry? There are many other dying industries in this state. Is he going to now stick up for other industries with his friends more so? I mean, this is one particular portion of the industry that he represents. But I'd like to know why this is now an issue and why are we continuing to defend it. Let's get back to the real issues when it comes to Prop 2 and why we need to expand Medicare. I haven't heard one simple response or an honest answer to where our current
the monopoly that the sovereign nations have on gaming
well, it has
today,
nothing to do with any sovereign nation in the state.
Well, that's where the gaming that exists on the sovereign nation's property is vastly greater than whatever is going to take place in the narrow scope.
How do the sovereign nations have to do with expanding
Because that's
gambling?
where the gaming's taking place in Idaho right today. Go to Plummer, go to Fort Hall,
Well,
go
again,
to Lewiston.
those tribes have a right to do that if they like.
I'm not questioning that.
Well,
but
you're
I'm saying,
using them as a prop to distract people right now.
I'm saying that the monopoly that they have, that a narrow sideboarded issue for the horse racing industry in Idaho, to keep it dynamic in those areas is a fair point.
I think it would be fair if the people decided to vote on Prop 1. But at
They
the same
have
time,
that
they
right.
should know what they're voting for and why they're propping up this industry, which is a dying industry. But it's not about horse racing, because horse racing is already legal according to the Constitution.
It is legal, but we know horse racing was doing fine until Indian gaming expanded, the lottery expanded.
So now you're blaming the tribes.
I'm saying that the revenue, you can go back and look at the records.
Tribes
you
are
can fact
very
check
rural
this. Look at the
economies.
revenue that was going into horse racing prior to the expansion of Indian gaming. Just look at that up.
So you don't support a free market?
I always supported free market.
It doesn't sound like it, because you're blaming the tribes now for what you say is
I'm saying in a free
hurting
market,
the horse racing
there'd
industry.
be gaming everywhere, but gaming's limited. It's limited by our Constitution. But the tribes have an exclusion of that after the lottery came in.
Well, that was also negotiated by your governor.
I don't
Your
believe there was
little
any
otter
expansion
administration.
of gaming if it was under a governor, it was a governor it was far before Governor Otter.
Well, I think the free market should speak for itself.
Okay.
All right, we just have a couple of minutes left, and this is going to require some discipline on both of your parts to watch Tyson so that he can give you a time cue. But I would like to see if you have a question you would like to ask your opponent as a question to end the evening before your closing remarks. And so we'll start with you, Ms. Jordan. Would you have a question that you'd like to ask Lieutenant Governor Little before we close this out? Something's still hanging out there from the evening.
Well, I think the people deserve better in their leadership. If you're going to run for public office, you should be transparent and honest with the people of Idaho. You should answer a simple question when it comes to where do you stand on this particular issue? How are you going to vote? This is Prop 2, the most significant issue, which comes down to our health care. Health care for people with mental health issues, our homeless, our veterans, our young children, everyone across the board. People are hurting and making more sacrifices than ever, and yet they have not had one solution when it comes down to who and where does this current Lieutenant Governor stand? Why will he not answer this one simple question? The people deserve more, and they deserve better.
Lieutenant Governor.
Well, for me, the issue is the fact that why is it that the traditional groups that would normally support the candidate in the other party, the firefighters, the police, and the IEA are supporting me rather than you?
Well, I disagree with that, because the firefighters, the police, and the teachers support our campaign. These are Republican groups that you're speaking to. And the firefighters, now they actually continue that endorsement, but I know that there are a lot of people within Their members are supporting us.
Okay.
All right, Joe, I'm going to ask you once again to take a look there at the response that we're getting, and if there's anything still hanging out there that people are asking that we can quickly answer.
And Dee, I would like to also get back to my opposition still has not answered the question. He wants to divert this issue. Why won't you not just simply answer the question?
I did answer the question. I said I want to be in a position to implement this
Yes or no,
with the will
sir?
of the people. Yes, I want to be in a position to implement this as the will of the
Yes,
people.
will you support Prop 2 or not?
Yes, I will implement this. I will implement
But you've
the will
also
of the
said that
people.
you will work to dismantle if that was the case.
I
Because
never said
the
I would
Republican
dismantle.
Party will not expand Medicaid.
That's not what I said.
Well,
All
you
right,
should
well, I think we're
look
just,
at what you stated before.
we're running out of time, so I'm going to ask you just one quick thing that I got some questions about, and this will be a very quick answer, and that is the concern about stagnant wages in Idaho, and what you would do to work on that issue that affects so many Idahoans. Ms. Jordan, you can start, but we just have 30 seconds.
30 seconds. While we are 50th in the country under the Otter Little administration in stagnant wages, this is going to be an issue that we are going to address firmly once I am governor. We're going to make sure that we index the wage. We're going to work with our local businesses, especially our small businesses, so that we can work together moving forward. This is also a reason why once I'm governor, we're going to have block grants to help incentivize young entrepreneurs and assess everything when it comes to education, to how we're going to firmly move Idaho out into the future rather than continuing to regress. But again, it goes back to the consumer price index and then increasing our wage standard here in our state.
Thank you.
The free market economy in Idaho, the lightest possible hand of government, lowering taxes, has created the fastest growing incomes in the nation, within the top 5. Fastest growing growth in number of jobs. As you grow jobs, the pressure on wages goes up, as it should. And that's taking place all over Idaho. We got some rural spots that we need to work on, but you can ask anybody within earshot of where we are right now about what's taking place in wages. They're going up. It's not because of government regulation. It's not because of government mandate. It's because of the miracle of the free enterprise and the fact that we operate with the lightest possible hand of government, with conservative governments, and with lowered taxes. And that's what's working in Idaho.
All right, I want to thank you both. We've covered a lot of territory here in the last almost 90 minutes, not quite 90 minutes, but we do want to get to your closing statements now. And I have to look at my notes to remember it. Yes, Ms. Jordan, you go first on your closing statement.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dee. And thanks our honorable panelists, and of course, thank my opponent, Mr. Little. We have an opportunity here. All of our Idahoans, they're looking for real leadership. And right now, we are plagued when it comes down to health care, plagued when it comes down to our education system, plagued when it comes down to a livable wage. Yesterday, I just went to the Interfaith Sanctuary, and I met a family of 2 parents working livable wage jobs, but at the same time, were still homeless, and with 2 kids and 1 child on the way. They were saying that it is not only unaffordable to live here in Idaho right now, but they are looking for leadership to not only raise the standard of the wage so that we can continue to live in a prosperous way, but they're looking for real leadership that listens. And everywhere I go, while I meet Idahoans all across our state, I'm listening. I hear you, Idaho. Your voices are the voices that I will represent once I'm governor in the State House, because this is our land together. And as someone who was firmly raised here on Idaho's land by my elders, I represent my children and our children, and I want to see us move into the future. So you're looking at an opportunity to vote for the past, or vote for me, the future of Idaho. And I want to thank you, and I ask each and every one of you for your vote. God bless.
Thank you, Ms. Jordan. Lieutenant Governor Brad Little.
Thank you, Dee. Representative Jordan, thank you. I think this is our last official meeting for the campaign, and it's been an honor to be part of this campaign, to be all over. Thank you, panelists. I'll miss you guys, maybe.
We'll be back.
But it has been an incredible honor to be Lieutenant Governor and to run this campaign. The thousands of people all over Idaho, including many that I saw last week from one end of the state to the other, are interested in one common thing that I've committed to, that every single decision that goes across the desk of the governor, I will look at to create the maximum opportunity for the people that are here, for their kids, and importantly for their grandkids. That means taking some long-range decisions. That means creating jobs, better jobs, where people can comfortably plan on retiring in Idaho. That means investing in education, not only so that we've got college and career-ready students, but so that our kids don't leave because they want to be here because we have great schools in Idaho. That means having affordable health care. It doesn't do you any good if your income's going up, if your health care costs are going up. I've been working on that. I'm hopeful that we'll get that done right away with this administration. And finally, I want to protect the quality of life and the values that we have here in Idaho so that everyone in Idaho can thrive. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much. We do want to just thank you for hanging in there with us for the last 90 minutes as we've covered many topics, but we're going to continue the conversation on Facebook Live if you'd like to weigh in and have some conversation there. Also remember that all of the debates that we've had here on KTVB are posted online at ktvb.com, and that's where you will also find this debate and the voter guide to help you as we approach Election Day, Tuesday, November 6th. And I also want to mention our Verify reports. We're working hard on those. I think we were challenged on a couple of issues tonight that we'll be working on, but there are many Verify reports available for you as well at ktvb.com, and we invite you to check those out as you do your homework for Election Day on November 6th. Thanks again, and thanks to you both for being with us this evening.
Live on Facebook right now as we're wrapping up right now. Let me just put all the gear in place. We're going to let you scoot on over here. She's coming over. We got a lot to unpack.
You want me to stay right here?
Yeah, stay there, Melissa. Don't go anywhere.
Oh, great.
Stay where you are. All right, let's see. I'll put the mics in.
Don't worry about the
framing us
lapel.
up. Nah, don't worry about it. We just got these guys. We got this. How we doing, Troy? We good? All right. You can take off this. We don't need this anymore.
Perfect.
Take out the IFB too, huh?
Yeah.
All right. Okie dokie.
That's it.
That's it?
We pre-taped one yesterday that's airing tonight on Idaho Public Television.
And
I don't know if I'm allowed to
you can't scoop
promo.
your own
No.
show. Oh yeah, well yeah,
I'll
promo it.
promo my own
Public
show.
television,
But 8
PBS.
o'clock on Idaho Public Television, the Congressional District 1 debate between Russ Fulcher and Christina McNeil. But we taped it yesterday, and seventh debate. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done.
For now.
For now. Right.
Oh look, we're getting a better shot. Hi, Paul.
Perfect.
Paul's coming over. We got a roving shot here. Okay. Well, we're going to take a look now at our instant reaction poll from ktvb.com/vote. It looks like the question, who will you vote for in the governor's race? 57% of you say the Democrat, Paulette Jordan. 41% say the Republican, Lieutenant Governor Brad Little. And 2% say other. Davlin, looks like you're getting some votes in this race.
I've been waiting for this my whole life. Yes, write in. Do not. If elected, I will not serve. I do not want that job.
Well, after tonight's debate, you can see just how difficult of a position the governor is. I mean, you need to have mastery of so many different topics, and we only 90 minutes. It sounds like a lot on paper.
Not.
It is not a lot of time.
Not at all. And that's what we run into with all of the debates that we do, whether they're 60 minutes or 90 minutes, you still leave topics on the table. And even now across social media, I'm seeing people asking why we didn't get to certain topics. One of the interesting ones that I kind of wish we had gotten to was the declining population of steelhead and fish in Idaho.
That was the next question.
Critical issues, right? And even in 90 minutes, we don't have time. So
I also want to say hello to our friends that are watching over on YouTube. I have not neglected your chat. I've been watching. It has just been less lively than over on Facebook. So if you are watching us on YouTube, send us your comments and your thoughts here on YouTube, because we're simulcasting. We're on all platforms. But we are mostly here on Facebook with you. That's where a large majority of our audience is here at this hour. I think our poll is still open, so get your final votes in before we close the poll right now, ktvb.com/vote, or you go to the KTVB app, you scroll away and click on vote. And again, the question is, who will you vote for, Paulette Jordan or Brad Little? All right, instant reaction. The second debate, the second major debate, of course, we had one on Idaho Public Television a few weeks ago. Biggest differences right off the bat?
You know, I think we got more into justice and prison-related issues, which I think is critical. We also got into healthcare issues that are not just Medicaid expansion, although that is absolutely important. We touched on insurance, touched on mental health care, touched on the doctor shortage. You know, it doesn't matter if you have insurance if there's no doctor in your town to see you. And so we saw some really, really big differences, but also saw some major concern about prison overcrowding.
Yeah.
And there was some common ground that we saw.
Yeah, that was funny. I mean, it's funny, you know, in a political way where, you know, it's a very serious issue, but the candidates looked at each other and they realized that was the thing, the common ground they had.
We got this, right.
Topics that we touched on here tonight, major topics that people were asking about leading up to this, of course, education. A lot of questions about education. I thought the prison reform, that was a topic that you guys dove into and the candidates dove into. Still, you know, some questions. That $500 million question is still on the table. I didn't feel like there was an extremely clear answer from either candidate.
And that really stood out to me is, you know, regardless of long-term solutions, we still have a critical problem right now in Idaho. And as we said before the show, even if you say, you know what, if you don't want to end up in prison, don't break the law. Well, you know, at some point, it's a taxpayer problem for all of us because these are folks that we need to pay to house. And eventually, the vast majority of them will end up back in our neighborhoods. And so when we're talking about what happens after folks are incarcerated, programs to get them back into society, it's something that affects every single one of us. So we saw commitment from candidates to focus on these long-term projects, you know, these long-term programs, but really not a clear answer on what we do right now for inmates, what we do in the county or the county jails rather, what we do at this moment.
I agree, and I didn't really get a full sense of if Brad would support the $500 million.
That's what we were saying,
So I'm just jumping in on the conversation.
Morgan Boyson joins us now.
Hello. but truly, I think you're right. It didn't feel very fulfilling.
No,
on that question.
There wasn't a yes, you know, this is going to hurt, but we need to do it, partly because of growth and partly because of where we are right now. There was no yes or no. You know, at some point with debates, you know, I think in our experience, when the candidate's not going to answer, they're not going to answer. You need to move on, and that's kind of the point that we hit with that. Okay, so you're not going to answer. We're focusing on other things. But.
Well, there's two strategies you saw tonight. There's the hold your breath and kind of hope the question goes away.
Yeah.
Which was interesting, the superintendent debate, and then there's the you talk until the point is made. Morgan, I want to ask you about a line of questioning you had for Miss Jordan. It was very clear. It was talking about when you had your interaction with her at KBOI Radio, and you had the whole uninvited guest incident. Do you feel your question was answered tonight? Do you feel satisfied with the interaction you had?
I think maybe along the lines of the filmmaker in the documentary, that was a little bit cleared up for me in terms of where campaign contributions were going with ads versus the documentary, something I also need to verify and look into. But along the lines of whether I think that she will be accessible to the media, aka the people, those of you watching, if she should become governor, no, I didn't feel fully satisfied because she said that she believes in free speech and she believes in the power and in the purpose of the media. But every time, I don't want to say every time, that could be dramatic, but in a lot of instances where we've held her accountable or we've scrutinized some things or we've questioned her connections to the Super PAC Strength and Progress or her connections to these Wyoming companies where she's spending campaign contributions, her campaign has come out in front of it and explained things, but she has not. And that would be nice to hear from one of the candidates, right? Is to say, for them to get out in front of an issue and say, this is actually what's going on. Perception is reality for so many voters. And how things are perceived in her campaign, it feels there's a lack of transparency. And so when the media questions her on it and she retaliates, like on Friday by saying that we're not on her side and we're not running for her. Well, that's not our job.
No, it's
so
not.
I just want to make that very clear. You know, good question. I do think that, you know, she answered it in the way she could, and by saying that she believes in the power of the media, and I hope that anyone running for the highest office of the state would. But the way that she has acted thus far, when being questioned on these things, I don't feel I've gotten that response tonight really aligned with how she's acted.
Melissa, we got through a lot of comments here tonight. Is there anything, though, that you felt was left on the table? Anything you're still looking for an answer as a journalist, as a reporter, trying to get that info to the people before next Tuesday? There's a lot of questions for people about what candidate they want to vote for, depending on very specific things: Medicaid,
Right.
horse racing, infrastructure. Is there anything out there still floating around that you think was not answered here tonight that you will work over the next 8 days to get confirmed, so any voters have questions on Tuesday, they can say, okay, well, this is the answer?
You know, for this race in particular, honestly, I think a lot of people have their minds made up, but there are some lingering questions as far as specific plans that these candidates have for lowering the cost of health care. You know, Lieutenant Governor Little has a good point when we're talking, so much of the conversation has focused on Proposition 2, and for good reason. Yeah. You know, Medicaid expansion is something that is on the minds of so many Idahoans, but there are so many other issues. Rising insurance premiums, the doctor shortage, as we talked about today. And so more specifics, I would love to see more specifics on healthcare.
Morgan, any outlying questions for you that we'll dig over the next week to try to get the answer to that you thought might have been left on the table tonight?
I wish I was, to be honest, Melissa is the expert when it comes to Medicaid and healthcare. I wish I was as well versed as you in that topic. You've done a Verify on it, Joe. It's something that I'd like to study up a little bit more of and really dissect their answers to understand this self-funded aspect, you know, and if it really will save the state money that we could then put elsewhere, as Ms. Jordan claims.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yes.
Yeah, so Medicaid expansion really is a complex thing. When we talk about offsets that the state will see, we're talking about money that counties in the state currently spend on programs that would be covered by Medicaid. But one of the misconceptions is that all of that money is just going to revert right back to the state, especially when we're talking about that money being spent on a county level. It's not like Ada County is going to send all of that money to the state general fund. Also, regardless of, even if this program entirely ended up paying for itself, the state still has to put money up at the front end to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. And that's just one of the estimates that the Milliman firm, which did the analysis for the Department of Health and Welfare, put forward. I worked with the Idaho Statesman reporter Audrey Dutton and our associate producer Devin Downey on a big deep dive into these estimates, and the reality is even the best analysis cannot predict accurately what this will cost the state and how many people will enroll, and that's the end. If anyone says this will pay for itself, we don't know that. We also don't know that it will cost, you know, millions and billions and trillions of dollars. We just don't know, and that's the bottom line.
And a lot of mental health care and increasing those services and improving community-based services, which have been really slashed. When I talked to behavioral health experts across the state, they said those services are what are so critical, and Idahoans are in dire need of these community-based services, yet we're lacking, and we're focusing more on the inpatient psychiatric treatment, and that's not necessarily what we need. So when you talk about Medicaid expansion, mental health care services are something that rely heavily, particularly community-based services, rely heavily on Medicaid dollars, right?
Right. They rely on Medicaid dollars, but again, if there aren't the programs and the providers in place in those communities, Medicaid expansion really is just one piece of a very complex puzzle. But for so many Idahoans who are uninsured right now, who fall into that gap, they're telling me it's a critical piece of that puzzle. So it's so complex. Distilling it into, sir. Good job, Mark Johnson.
See you at 10.
Mark, thanks for toughing it out. Are you on a 10 tonight?
I'm on a 10.
Okay, our Mark Johnson, he's going to get back to the studio and get ready for the news at 10. And
What
so
a rock
does Morgan.
star. Well, I've got a few more minutes.
So we're going to do this for about 10 more minutes, and then we'll wrap it up depending on our interaction. Looks like most of our comments are winding down. Melissa, there's one interaction I wanted to ask you about. One of the more contentious interactions tonight revolved around oil and gas leases in the Little family. The Jordan campaign sent out a release today, said there was some questionable dealings from the Little family on land that was owned by Brad Little.
Right.
What was your take of, number one, the answer you got, and number two, why that press release was sent out from the Jordan campaign.
You know, I think it's interesting because Brad Little's right. There's no fracking in Idaho right now, but he sidestepped the question because it was an exploratory lease. He was open to it happening on his land. You know, the question is, how much does it really affect his neighbors and the water table? You know, Brad Little, as a rancher and someone who's been in the legislature and then in the lieutenant governor's office for so long, obviously knows water issues, but the whole idea that, you know, oh, well, this has nothing to do with fracking, well, it was an exploratory measure.
Exactly.
They didn't find anything.
Exactly.
And so
it's a moot point.
Right, exactly. I thought that Paulette Jordan's, the press release that I alluded to in the question, it was pretty interesting, and I'm going to read directly from it. Paulette Jordan has vowed to continue her commitment to protect Idaho's public lands when she is elected governor. Protecting private lands means keeping her promise to landowners and to communities, opposed to lease agreements with oil and gas companies. So kind of conflating a bunch of issues here, right? She opens it up talking about public lands, but the real issue is private lands and how much that affects things like property values, how much it affects the water table, whether it does contribute to seismic activity, if that exploratory, if those exploratory measures do end up finding anything and fracking happens.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because I dove into that a little bit last week and found that lease agreement with Gem County, and although expired, I think it was a valid question. And to piggyback off of that, the public lands and the federal lands to state ownership, or we manage so much of the land right now, but that got contentious too.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, when it came to fire management.
Yeah, and fire protection districts.
Yeah, particularly this past season and the fires that we saw, maybe not in Idaho, but in surrounding states. Who's to say that's not going to happen here?
Well, and you know, when I was in print newspaper, I covered so many wildfires in the Magic Valley in central Idaho, and it's such a critical issue. It's something that I know KTVB has covered, we've covered at Idaho Reports, but this blend of, you know, increasing temperatures, longer fire seasons, and the fuel load on public lands. And the misnomer in this debate is those things are mutually exclusive. It's either you focus on climate change or you focus on land management. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. And every single one of the experts I talked to said it has to be a mixture of both. You cannot address one and ignore the other if you want to effectively combat these devastating fires.
How about the interaction they had about Proposition 1?
Oh, I'm going to cover that at on the news at 10, because you have covered that extensively, and viewers want to know about it too, because you had Democratic Mayor Beater of Boise come out and support, and then Governor Otter come out and support. So it's really seemingly a nonpartisan. I
wouldn't say it's nonpartisan, but you have people from both sides of the aisle that are on.
Right. And I think that there's a lot of misconception around what it really is. And that was fiery. I mean, when you have somebody who is from the Coeur d'Alene tribe, and that's their, Little was correct, there is a monopoly over gaming when it comes to the tribes. But you know, that's their right as sovereign nations. That is their right. And but Proposition 1, it would impact the tribes.
Oh yeah.
If it passes, and so I can understand how she would not want it to pass simply for that reason, but also because it's deceiving on the surface.
I've got to say, we did an hour-long special on Proposition 1 last week on Idaho Public Television, and it was one of the most contentious conversations I have ever moderated. I have moderated several contentious debates and panels in my career, and that was in the top 5.
And why do you think that is?
It's so interesting. It's a blend of morality and money, and that's what things that get people so fired up. You would think that the Medicaid expansion discussion would have been more testy, and it certainly was testy, but I've talked to Idahoans who say that that this is getting people more worked up than anything. It's the morality of whether you think that gambling has a place in our society, whether it is a sinful thing that we don't want anything to do with, or whether, you know, it's not the role of government to say that we shouldn't have gaming. And it's also, there's a lot of money at stake for a very small group of these business owners, you know, when it comes to Treasure Valley Racing. I should disclose that one of the people who's very involved with Treasure Valley Racing, Harry Bettis, is the president of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, which underwrites Idaho Reports. Has nothing to do with our reporting, but we see how much that affects a small group of people compared to the rest of Idaho, but it affects them very much.
We're going to hang around for a few more minutes, but let us take a look at this poll. Again, the poll we asked you at home tonight. Who will you vote for? And, of course, you have the options of Paulette Jordan, Brad Little, and other. And our poll, as you can all see at the bottom of your screen, if you're here with us on Facebook, 58% Paulette Jordan, 40% Brad Little, 2% other. So, Morgan, you might have gotten a few votes out there tonight. We know Melissa said she wouldn't serve if elected.
No,
so.
not interested.
I have
no, thank you.
desire.
Again, it's a non-scientific poll. I don't actually know if the producer has sent me how many people have voted on
curious.
that. As we head closer to next Tuesday, it is very exciting because a week from tomorrow will be the big night. It's been, what, 2 years of build-up for it? We've had a lot of conversations. There's been a lot of topics we've covered. What's there left to do for these campaigns?
Well, the final stretch, Brad Little put out ads, television ads, a big push after, when was this?
It was in the last few weeks.
Yeah, it was in early October, I believe. Jordan is kind of going the social media route.
I don't think she's had television ads.
She has not.
Not this.
Have you seen any?
No.
Not this cycle. She did in the primary and online.
Online only.
Which is why she said she's paying this documentary filmmaker to create these ads.
Which is interesting because there are still, I know people like to say, people our age don't watch TV, but we're not the only people who are voting.
Yeah.
And that's pretty interesting.
I thought that was interesting too. You're not seeing nearly as many political ads for the gubernatorial race as you are for the proposition.
No, definitely not.
So, final stretch wise, this was the last debate. Do they ride it out and just wait until November?
So many people is there anything you can do in the next? Yeah, there's a lot of early voting.
Early voting numbers.
What can you do in the last week, Melissa?
One of the things I think that we take for granted as journalists who cover politics is that a lot of people do not tune in or touch base with the races until the week before the election.
You're absolutely right.
And even these huge races that we just obsess over for months, like the governor's race or Proposition 2, there are still people going, okay, now wait a minute, what's going on with this again? Yes. That's why we touch on some of the issues again that they've talked about over and over again, like marijuana, like Proposition 2, like Proposition 1, because there are some people who are just tuning in to this race. So I think it would be a huge mistake for any of these candidates in any of these races to take the next week off, because there are a number of people who have made up their minds, but there are still Idahoans, everyday Idahoans, who could be convinced to cast their vote one way or the other.
And interestingly, when you look at Paulette's campaign finance reports and you look at all the amount of travel she's been doing, a lot of it in state though, right? She's been spending a lot of money on private planes and rental cars and to go all over Idaho, because she doesn't have the name recognition that Brad Little does. So he has spent far less, a significant amount less, on travel across Idaho, and he just said he got back from his tour, the Republican tour around the state of Idaho. But for the most part, Republicans know who he is. For the most part, people didn't know who Paulette Jordan was until she gained, notoriety with this campaign and garnering the national attention and whatnot. So she had to make a concerted effort to go around and shake Idahoans' hands across the state. Brad Little didn't necessarily have to do that as much.
Although sorry, I thought you were done. The counter to that, though, is I talked to so many lieutenant governor candidates during the primary that when Kelly Packer, for example, rolled into town and people would say, "Oh, are you our lieutenant governor?" You look at name recognition polls from the gubernatorial Republican primary. Raul Labrador had Brad Little beat on name recognition in the beginning. So again, I think that's something that we take for granted. Not everybody knows who, or they certainly do now, right?
Oh yeah.
But at the beginning of this race, not everybody knew who he was, because it's not a high-profile, exciting Fox News headline-grabbing position.
And they both spent a lot of, and to go back on what they both did spend a lot of time traveling the state. But I think Representative Jordan had to do a lot more going into different communities.
Well, it's totally different paths as well. Call it what it is. Idaho is a very red state.
Exactly.
And so you call it what it is. Also, Paulette Jordan lives up in northern Idaho, and that is a far drive to some of those major communities.
She lives here.
You're correct. But she's from northern Idaho. So we have our poll, which is closed now. We had more than 1,100 people voting tonight. Thank you so much. Our final poll results here. Who you vote for? Paulette Jordan, 58% of our KTVB voters at home, again over 1,000 of them. 40% Lieutenant Governor Brad Little, 2% other. Not a scientific poll. That is correct. Only 1,100 people voted on that. You can talk about demographics all day long, what person voted on our poll here tonight. Again, this is just something we like to ask the viewers to do to keep them engaged. We're just curious. Those are the results down to the question. Of note, the Paulette Jordan margin, the positive margin over Little was about the same throughout the entire 2 hours almost that we had the question up.
I also want to, I know we're wrapping up, but one thing to note is those of you watching out there, we would love to hear from you. I'm sure Melissa and her team over Idaho Public Television would love to hear from you as to the issues you want us to continue to unpack and verify. We have our Verify segment.
Oh, yes.
But also what topics you feel maybe weren't fully vetted tonight or you feel we didn't fully dive into. And, you know, we can still talk to these candidates. It's not like the only forum is the debate. So
They disappear.
Also, these aren't the only. This isn't the only race we're covering. If there are any other issues on the ballot, let us know. Hit us up. We're on social media. We're cool kids.
We're on Twitter.
You can find us.
Do people still go on Twitter?
Of course people
we
go
do.
on Twitter. Do you think they might get rid of a like button on Twitter? It's a
Yeah,
whole,
isn't that
it's a whole different
nonsense?
debate for another time.
Let's make Twitter even worse.
That
than
might
it
save
is.
people their jobs. I don't know.
Well.
So,
we're going to wrap this up. Melissa Davlin, final word for you. And then Morgan, you'll get one too. Don't worry.
closing statements.
Closing statements
Closing
now.
statements.
Closing statements. 1 minute. Give me the sign. You have the
All
cue
right,
card.
we're
gonna
they're
do-
gone.
oh, the
Is Tyson
cue
Miller
card.
still in the building?
bummer.
All right.
Okay.
Melissa, what are your final thoughts?
You know, I at this point, I think it. Again, Republicans would be remiss to take any race for granted. We've spent, of course, the past 2 hours talking about the gubernatorial election, but Lieutenant Governor could be very, very interesting. There are a lot of moderates who are really behind Kristen Cullum. That's one that we're going to be watching. Superintendent, you saw the debate here earlier today. That is going to be fascinating. And we're going to be keeping a really close eye on those as well as legislative races too, because as much as these executive offices shape the vision, when it really gets down to the nitty-gritty, it's those lawmakers, and there are some key races around the state that we're going to be keeping an eye on.
Morgan?
Thursday, Friday,
All right.
something like that?
You know, I haven't covered a gubernatorial race here yet as a reporter, just primaries. And so this is really exciting for me. And I think what I've seen so much of here is that people Joe's age and my age are energized. And whatever candidate that's for, they're energized, and they're going out and they're voting. And whether it's early voting or absentee or day of, these candidates are energizing voters down ballot. So superintendents, lieutenant governors, the governor. And a lot of moderates or people that have felt disillusioned by the process and disconnected by the process are coming out and voting, which is really exciting for the state of Idaho, and it's exciting for us as political reporters as well. So I would just encourage you guys to get your voice out there if you haven't yet. And it'll be an interesting next week, and I cannot wait for November 6th.
Well,
these races are going to be close.
Oh, they're going to be close, and that is a perfect transition. We are 8 days away from the election, November 6th. And, of course, Morgan will be on our News at 10 tonight. She'll be breaking down the debate, so we'll have some more coverage. Also, our Mark Johnson and myself will be doing our verifies through the end of the week.
And I want to let you guys know about our voter guide on KTVB.com and the KTVB app. It has everything you need to know about the elections, about the races, legislative, coroner, county races, all of the resources you need to. If you haven't registered to vote yet, Idaho does allow you to register to vote day of. So head on over to KTVB.com or the KTVB app.
And we still have a lot of time. You can get a lot done in a week. So if there's any questions, you send them to your favorite political reporter. They will dig to get you the answer. There's a lot of them out there. You know, after this after this election, we'll have our own election. Okay, well, also don't forget, a week from tomorrow, next Tuesday, we will have our coverage here on KTVB, on KTVB.com, as well as on all of our social media pages. So stay tuned. We will have some interesting election night plans for you guys to watch out for. For now, though, we are going to step aside from NNU, the Brandt Center. Thank you so much to Northwest Nazarene University for hosting us here for all the debates. Melissa Davlin from Idaho Public Television, thank you as always for spending your time. She did it.
It's been wonderful.
You're awesome.
You did 7 debates in total?
7 debates.
That's
7
wow.
debates.
And folks, that's a lot. You think studying for one test? Imagine having 7 finals. And then, you know, you have to go on TV and actually, that's your test.
7 debates and 2 hour-long specials on the propositions.
There
so
you
that
go.
is a lot of political
Melissa
TV.
is an expert on the propositions and most other topics.
Thank you. You're too kind. No, and thank you so much for inviting me. It was an honor to be here. I had so much fun.
Yay.
Well, good. It's all. I'm glad we had some fun, right?
We had some fun.
It's
It's
tough
great.
sometimes. Our Morgan Boytson, you'll see here less than 3 hours away on the News at 10. Morgan, You get back to Boise. You got a lot of
No,
work
I'm
to
staying.
get
I'm
through.
staying
Oh,
out
you're
here.
staying
So I'll be
here.
live
Okay.
here
Well,
from
she'll
the
be
Brandt
live
Center.
here from the Brandt Center at 10 o'clock. Well, I'm Joe Paris. I'll see you early tomorrow morning on today's morning news, and we will kick off some more verifies tomorrow as well. Signing off here, though, from beautiful Nampa, Idaho. Thank you so much for joining us over the last 5 hours for this coverage. Make sure to check out the election guide.
All right. Good job.
Great job.